Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. Trump. We got a World War III alert. Trump gives Iran 10 days to surrender or else. Iran says or else. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, I've been warning y'all about it, and World War III is just around the corner. Let's get right into the content. Salute.
Can you believe this is unfolding in real time? Because what we're watching right now is Washington quietly doing the one thing it never admits it does. Repositioning like a power that suddenly remembers its people are mortal. Not invincible, not untouchable. Mortal. Over the past week, you've had credible reporting about U.S. personnel being told to leave key regional hubs, families in places like Bahrain preparing for departures, and a general posture change that looks a lot like an establishment trying to reduce the number of Americans sitting in easy range if this crisis snaps from threats into fireworks.
The recent tensions between Iran and the United States have triggered a sudden military shift in the region. Reports say hundreds of American troops quietly evacuated, and the region is bracing for what could come next.
Hundreds of U.S. troops have now been evacuated from the largest American military base in the Middle East.
For the second time in weeks, American troops are being pulled back from the Middle East.
And all of it is happening while the U.S. president publicly toys with limited strikes on Iran.
Terry Leo Wilson wants you to forget what she did in Austin, while Texas families buried soldiers killed.
As if you can bomb a sovereign state in one of the most militarized corridors on Earth and keep it limited by sheer American willpower.
But thank you very much for being here. It's a great honor. And the media, thank you. You can leave now. I can say I am considering it.
Now, to be clear, the official language is always neat. They don't call it retreat. They call it a posture adjustment, a precaution, routine force protection. But you don't shuffle people around routinely when you're confident you control the escalation ladder. You do it when you know the other side has cards you can't simply wave away with press conferences. And Iran, whatever you think of its politics, has spent years building exactly the kind of deterrent portfolio that makes big bases, fixed runways, and centralized command hubs feel less like power and more like liability when the temperature spikes.
مواردی که اشاره کردی توان مقابله با حالا ناوهای بعضی کشورها که میگن هست تو خلیج فارس نمیدونم کلی جنگنده روشه و نمیدونم سپر دفاعی داره و اینها توان برخورد با اونا رو داره در شرایطی که لازم باشه.
بله ببینید ما هم در سطح هم در زیر سطح و هم بالای سطح سلاح استفاده کردیم. اهداف اینها در واقع همین اهدافی که شما گفتید هست، یعنی دشمنی که هر دشمنی.
این که میگن نمیشه نزدیک این ناوها شد اصلا قبول دارید شما؟
اصلا اینطوری نیست. ما بعضی وقتا میگفتیم اون سینه سمت راست شناور تا چک کن. بعد میفهمی که ما کجا هستیم.
چقدر
اینطوری نیست. ما گاهن شده نزدیک اونا شدیم، علامت هم زدیم اونا ندیدن و جعلنا من بین ایدیهم سدا.
So, when you hear that any limited strike could ignite something broader, that isn't melodrama. That's geography. That's physics. That's the reality of a region where one miscalculation can jump borders faster than diplomats can book a flight. And before we go deeper, because trust me, we are about to dig into a whole mess of hypocrisy. If you're as fired up as I am about getting the real story without the Empire-approved filter, go ahead and like this. Share it with someone who still thinks surgical strikes are a morality tale, and subscribe. All right, hold on. Let's unpack what's really happening here, because the public is being fed this familiar script. The U.S. is considering limited strikes to force Iran into compliance, to secure stability, to keep the world safe, pick your slogan. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister is out here saying they're drafting proposals and still talking diplomacy, while also warning in plain language that threats don't magically stay limited once they turn into explosions. And Washington, in the same breath, talks about peace while moving assets, floating deadlines, and keeping the region on edge like a casino dealer who hates losing.
The Iranians are in all likelihood going to try to shut down the Straits of Hormuz and stop the flow of oil out of the Persian Gulf. So I don't see what Trump can do. Can have U.S. forces attack Iran, but that doesn't solve the problem. It's not going to get rid of the ballistic missiles. It's not going to cause regime change. It's not going to end Iranian support for Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas. So we don't have a military option here. I believe that virtually every country in the Middle East, except maybe the UAE, which is pretty closely allied with Israel, but virtually every other country in the Middle East, plus the Chinese, plus the Russians, want this war to not happen. The only country that really wants it to happen is Israel. As we've talked about, the Americans really don't want this war. So you see the remarkable power of Israel simply because it has such a hold over American policymakers. Just think about it. It's hard to see why it makes sense to start this war from a purely strategic point of view. But then it looks like Trump has boxed himself in. And furthermore, the Israelis appear to be putting enormous pressure on him to go to war against Iran. And, can he disobey his masters? I don't think so. Who wants this war? Benjamin Netanyahu.
But wait, there's more to this mess, because if you want to understand the evacuations and the scrambling, you have to stare at the map the way people in the region stare at it. The U.S. isn't present in the Middle East. It's embedded. It has a network. Big bases, smaller sites, logistics arteries, spread across Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, the UAE, Jordan, Iraq, and historically Syria and Saudi Arabia, with missions that are always described as defensive or stabilizing. Air operations, command and control, maritime security, counter ISIS, partner training, deterrence. And yes, those missions exist on paper. But in practice, it's infrastructure, a lattice that lets Washington project power, pressure governments, police energy routes, and punish states that refuse to kneel, while calling it rules-based order. In Qatar, Al Udeid is the crown jewel. Forward headquarters functions for the U.S. regional command structure and a central air hub. Reporting has put roughly around 10,000 U.S. troops there in typical posture, and it's exactly the kind of high-value, fixed-location asset that becomes politically terrifying if you think missiles might start flying. In Bahrain, you've got Naval Support Activity Bahrain. In Bahrain, you've got Naval Support Activity Bahrain, home-base territory for U.S. Fifth Fleet operations in the Gulf, maritime presence, shipping lane security, deterrence messaging. And you've had reporting on military families there preparing for potential departures amid heightened tensions. Because when leadership thinks the threat environment is changing, dependents are the first human beings they try to move out of the blast radius. In Kuwait, the U.S. posture has long centered on logistics and ground support. Camp Arifjan, Ali al-Salam Air Base, and other facilities that function as staging and sustainment for regional operations. In the UAE, Al-Dhafra is a critical air base used for reconnaissance and air operations, frequently described in open reporting as a hub for advanced air activity and ISR platforms. In Jordan, you have sites tied to the counter-ISIS mission, supporting operations and regional partnering, made more famous in public consciousness after attacks in prior years. In Iraq, you've got well-known locations like Ain al-Assad and the Erbil area, linked to advising, support, and counter-ISIS frameworks, which they helped create. Now notice how the official line always frames this as noble. Air support, counter-terrorism, stability. And yes, ISIS is real, and communities in the region have bled under ISIS brutality. Nobody with a conscience denies that.
Okay, guys, your car insurance company does not want you to know you can do this.
Big chunk of your monthly payment isn't even for insurance. It's just paying the agent's commission. Crazy, right? But there's a way out.
Here's my old bill, $239 every month. My new one, $28 a month for the same full coverage. Literally life-changing.
This is how I found the same exact car insurance for $100 cheaper.
So this website can find liability for as low as $29 a month and full coverage insurance for only $38 a month.
Just go to this site and take the quiz and you'll get a...
But here's the double standard that really gets me. When Iran positions itself as a sovereign state building deterrence in a hostile neighborhood, it's destabilizing. When Washington builds a continent-spanning web of bases, thousands of miles from its own shores, that's security. When Gulf monarchies, unelected, unaccountable, often brutally repressive, host foreign forces and buy protection with oil money, they're called partners. But when a country like Iran refuses to be subordinated, it's punished economically, threatened militarily, and described as a uniquely evil actor that must be contained at all costs. And the Gulf monarchies, let's talk about them plainly. These are regimes that have been insulated from the democratic pressures they love preaching to everyone else about, because they sit on strategic energy geography and they align with U.S. military architecture. They thrive under a security umbrella that effectively outsources their survival, while democracy becomes a talking point reserved for countries Washington wants to discipline. That's why you can have endless lectures about Iranian governance while smiling through arms sales and red carpet receptions for monarchs whose political systems would be condemned as authoritarian nightmares if they weren't useful. It's not values, it's utility. And the bill for that arrangement is paid by ordinary people, through regional militarization, economic dependency, and the constant risk that their countries become launchpads and therefore targets in someone else's war. Now swing your attention to Syria, because Washington's moral theater gets even uglier there. You've got recent reporting about Trump effectively boasting that he put Syria's new president, Ahmed al-Sharaa, in office. Insert. While the reporting notes the deeply controversial background, links to former jihadist currents, the kind of history that would normally trigger nonstop war on terror screaming if it belonged to an enemy rather than a convenient new reality. You know what really gets me? The same political ecosystem that treats terrorism like an eternal stain when it serves them suddenly discovers nuance and pragmatism when the person in question fits a U.S. preferred outcome. And while that's going on, you've also had reporting about U.S. airstrikes in Syria framed as counter-ISIS operations, alongside reporting about shifting U.S. presence and handovers at key sites. So on one hand, Washington is saying, we're fighting terror. On the other hand, it's playing power politics with partners and outcomes that blur every supposed red line. And then, this is the punchline. They turn around and threaten limited strikes on Iran, as if the region is a sterile lab where America can conduct controlled experiments without blowback. Now let's deal with the propaganda layer, because it's central to how escalation is sold. Trump has publicly thrown out massive disputed claims about protest death tolls, numbers so large and so specific that they immediately demand evidence, not vibes. Iran's foreign minister has pushed back, essentially calling the bluff and demanding proof for extraordinary claims. And independent reporting has shown wide disagreement on death toll estimates, with figures varying dramatically depending on the source and methodology, meaning any politician tossing out a headline number without transparent backing is not informing you. They're shaping your emotions for policy ends. And then there are the sensational allegations circulating about sexual violence against protesters and detainees, claims that explode across social media because they're horrifying and because they harden public opinion fast. Here's the responsible way to handle this. Acknowledge that sexual violence in detention is a documented abuse pattern in multiple contexts globally, and credible human rights work has, in other periods and places, substantiated such crimes. But also say clearly that viral claims, especially when attached to war fever, are routinely weaponized, exaggerated, fabricated, or selectively amplified to manufacture consent. If someone is telling you this happened and the evidence trail is murky, politically loaded, and timed perfectly to justify bombs, You don't swallow it whole. You demand verification, chain of custody, and independent corroboration. Anything less is how propaganda walks you into a war with your eyes open and your brain switched off. So here's where I land, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The U.S. posture in the Middle East is the product of decades of imperial habit. Bases, fleets, leverage, coercion, sold as stability while it repeatedly generates instability. The Gulf monarchies have been allowed to outsource sovereignty and accountability under that umbrella. And now Washington is flirting with another limited strike fantasy while quietly moving its people out of harm's way. Because deep down, it knows the region is not a movie set and Iran is not a helpless target. If you want de-escalation, you don't start by threatening bombs and calling it diplomacy. You start by ending the double standards, stopping the economic strangulation masquerading as policy, and treating regional states, yes, including Iran, as actors with agency rather than obstacles to be managed. If you want more of this kind of straight, unsanitized breakdown, share this, subscribe, and keep showing up. Because the moment people stop paying attention, the same machines that lied yesterday will confidently lie again.
else on the record with Iran, and he's done it with a clock attached. 10 to 15 days at most. While the US military has been moving serious hardware into the region, and while American officials keep floating limited strikes, as if that phrase means anything at all, or makes anything limited once you light everything up. Trump says he's considering limited strikes to boost his negotiating position. So that's how he does it, is it? A single admission removes the polite little story that some people might like to tell themselves, Republicans chiefly, about diplomacy being a separate lane from war planning, because it's not the case when this Bert does it, is it? A negotiation ends up becoming a coercion exercise because the other side doesn't jump to his whims fast enough. The second a threat is presented as a tool. Well, that is Trump's choice, isn't it? But it fixes a problem for him too, that if he keeps escalating the posture and the rhetoric, that he has to either climb down publicly at some point or climb into something that he won't be as easily able to climb himself out of. But the US military build-up being described as anything but subtle, of course. Reporting cites more than 120 aircraft moved into the region in recent days, all being described as the largest surge since the 2003 Iraq War, with fighter aircraft like F-35s and F-22s alongside enablers like AWACS and tankers and cargo aircraft that all make sustained operations possible rather than symbolic. Then there's the USS Gerald R. Ford being redeployed from the Caribbean towards the Middle East to join up with the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group. Recent reporting noting a brief transmission of its location off the coast of Morocco as it was transiting through and into the Mediterranean. Carrier movements get sold as presents, and carrier movements operate as options. And options create pressure on decision makers to use when they have visibly assembled. Keir Starmer is also now being pulled into this story, into the mechanics of Donald Trump's threats through Diego Garcia, that joint UK-US base in the Indian Ocean, because it sits inside the practical question of launch points and permissions. And this is causing a little bit of a dispute because Starmer has miraculously managed to, well, he's found himself a backbone even. He's told Trump UK bases are off limits if he wants to have a go at Iran. Clearly having driven the orange oath more mad than usual, as he's publicly been ranting about Diego Garcia, which is, of course, one of the Chagos Islands, on his own platform. And well, that tells you how he treats allied legal constraints, isn't it? There's bargaining chips and there's targets, and being told he can't use them for his own purposes will absolutely trigger yet another toddler tantrum. Amir Saeed Iravani, Iran's ambassador and permanent representative to the UN, has put Iran's position in writing to the UN leadership and the Security Council president. Iran says it will not initiate war, and they never do, they never have, so there's no reason to doubt them on that. And it says any military aggression will meet a decisive and proportionate response under Article 51 of the UN Charter. Well, we've certainly seen them defend themselves, haven't we? But that letter doesn't talk in riddles, it's straight language. It states that US bases, facilities, assets in the region would become legitimate targets in that defensive response. And it attaches responsibility for unpredictable and uncontrolled consequences, which might as well be Donald Trump's middle name instead of John. But that's directly aimed at the United States, of course. Abbas Araghchi, Iran's foreign minister, has been speaking in parallel in a way that traps the American public posture even further, because he said a diplomatic solution is within reach. And he's described the military option as unnecessary and unhelpful, while also saying Iran is prepared for peace and diplomacy. He's also said the US side has not asked for zero enrichment in talks, though there's been some for and against denials on that one. But he's framed the next step as Iran preparing a draft proposal for a possible deal. A negotiation process with a draft text and guiding principles, well, that then creates a paper trail, doesn't it? And a paper trail produces receipts, and receipts constrain all the lies that might come out later, don't they? So Trump's demand structure, as publicly described, is particularly maximalist. That's the word they like to use, isn't it? Nuclear constraints, missile constraints, regional policy constraints. Iran's public position is much narrower than that. Limits and monitoring, not abandonment of enrichment. That's not on the table. But it's a mismatch that creates a very simple outcome. Either Washington narrows its terms or Washington reaches for force. Trump has chosen to say the quiet part out loud, in that strikes are on the table as leverage, but that forces his bluff now into a test. Other reporting says top US national security officials have told Trump forces are prepared for potential strikes as soon as Saturday, while also saying Trump has not made a final decision and that movement of personnel can be standard before potential operations. And of course, today is standard or not, that the effect of that is the same. The public hears as soon as Saturday, which is today at time of writing, and the region reads it as imminent risk. And risk changes behavior even if the strike never actually ends up coming. So this is where Trump's deal or else starts turning back onto him, isn't it? Because he loves deadlines. He loves ultimatums. He loves the performance of dominance, of being the big hoo-ha. A deadline binds the person who sets it when the other side doesn't move. The other side doesn't need to match his tempo. The other side only needs to survive the window he's creating and let his own language do all the damage. But Iran has also been signaling that it's not waiting passively. Reporting has described Iran beginning joint naval exercises with Russia and China in the Sea of Oman and the northern Indian Ocean, issuing notices for rocket launches during drills, temporarily closing parts of the Strait of Hormuz during live fire activity. Not a declaration of war, is it? It's a show-off. That's a demonstration of capacity and disruption potential, with the world's shipping and energy routes sitting right there in the background. Now look at the political bind inside Washington. Press reporting references polling that shows Americans are broadly opposed to any war with Iran under current circumstances. It notes lawmakers moving towards war powers action. Trump's not shown any appetite for Congress restricting his freedom of movement, but he also relies on the idea that strength is doing whatever he wants without permission. A war powers fight becomes a public argument about legitimacy, timing, and necessity.
If you are sleeping in a position like this, you are wrecking your body and your breathing. Chronic neck pain happens when your cervical...
And then there's Netanyahu, isn't it? Because Benjamin Netanyahu is also speaking in his own register, saying Israel is prepared for any scenario and threatening extreme retaliation if Iran attacks Israel. Well, you couldn't manage that 12 days last June, could you? But anyway, reporting in the region describes Israeli preparations for strikes on Iran-backed movements if they support Iran in any war. Because yes, they wouldn't just strike Iran, they're looking at striking Iraq, or they're looking at striking Yemen, because that's Israel, isn't it? And that's the regional spillover map being drawn in advance. You have the likes of Lebanon and Yemen and Iraq and the sea lanes around the Middle East. When leaders talk like that in public, they narrow their own off-ramps. Sets of people in Washington keep trying to sell this as pressure for peace. Like moving war kit around is the same thing as writing a draft agreement, when it absolutely isn't. And you'd be a fool to believe it was. Like you could do both at once without the threat swallowing up all the diplomacy. But Trump has tied them together in public, hasn't he? So everyone else has to react to that. Limited strike keeps getting floated like it's some kind of a comfort blanket here, and it absolutely isn't. If you hit a state to make it comply, that's not a warning shot. That's a demand backed by violence. And it doesn't end when the first missiles land. It ends when the target gives you what you want or hits back hard enough to make you stop. And Iran has proven before it's capable of that. They've already stripped away the fantasy that hitting back is some vague concept by putting the base network into its declared response framework. Every American facility in the region, those carrier groups too, carries a different rate once a state says on the record that those sites become legitimate targets in a defensive response. If you hit us, they're fair game. That statement becomes a planning factor for both sides then, and it becomes a political problem for every host government that carries American assets. Keir Starmer getting dragged into it through Diego Garcia, whether he wants to be there or not, is another factor here, because that's not just a talking point. That's a launch-capable base with a legal leash attached. And the moment Donald Trump starts yelling about consent and treating it as an obstacle, the UK stops being a quiet partner and becomes a named hinge. Donald Trump has built a trap for himself in two directions at once, therefore. He's picked the posture that looks strong on television and feels strong in his own head, I'm sure. But it only works by shrinking other people's options. And that only holds if his own options stay wide and open, and they don't. Externally, Iran is telling him the retaliation map includes his US regional bases. Internally, the more he telegraphs a strike, the more he invites a fight over authority and legitimacy in Washington. The diplomatic lane starts looking like a stage prop unless it produces something tangible fast. When a process is described as moving into drafting text and guiding principles, the paper trail is created. The paper trail turns slogans into something you can then test. Once words are being put on paper, people will ask what is being demanded and what is being offered, and deal or else starts sounding less like strength and more like refusal to tolerate any outcome that doesn't feel like total surrender. Because let's face it, that is what Donald Trump's idea of diplomacy actually is. Abbas Araghchi saying Iran hasn't offered suspension and the US side hasn't asked for zero enrichment lands like a pin in Trump's public posture, because it suggests there's a set of terms being discussed that isn't that public demand, which means either Trump's public line is theatrics for an audience or his negotiating lane is drifting away from the slogans and he doesn't want anybody to notice. Steve Witkoff, as the US envoy here, sits inside this contradiction too, because the envoy exists to negotiate the language, not to deliver ultimatums. So it becomes brutally practical here. Either he produces a draft that reflects a real bargain, or he becomes the clean suit standing beside a threat the president's already advertising. Benjamin Netanyahu's government is also being pulled into the escalation ladder because Israeli leaders are talking publicly about preparations and retaliatory punishment. And regional reporting has described planning for wide strikes against allied movements across Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq if they support Iran. And it's always the same people who get treated as background scenery while presidents talk tough, isn't it? The American troops and the contractors on those bases, the civilians who live around them, they're the ones who get written into the retaliation map when leaders decide to use threats as negotiating tools. And they don't get a vote on whether their location becomes part of someone else's ultimatum. The sea lanes sit behind all of this like a loaded weapon on the table too. The Strait of Hormuz is symbolic, it's real. When military activity includes live fire drills and temporary closures during exercises, it doesn't need a full blockade to make insurers and markets twitch. Once markets twitch, governments start making decisions under pressure they didn't choose. And that's why the phrase unpredictable consequences is such a tell. It's how powerful people talk when they want to keep escalation on the table without owning the chain of events that follows. And Iran's letter aims that back at the US by attaching full responsibility for those consequences to Washington if they initiate aggression. Trump's uglier problem is that he sells outcomes as a binary, win or smash. And then he runs into the world as it is. Iran isn't a small target, it's huge, it's powerful, it isn't isolated, it isn't incapable, and it is telling him in advance that retaliation won't be limited to one site or one day. When you threaten a state like that on a countdown, you're not controlling events, you're lighting the fuse, and then arguing about who's holding the match. The domestic version of the same problem sits in the sentence Trump chose to say out loud, though. If a president says he's considering strikes to strengthen his negotiating position, he's not talking about defense against an imminent attack. He's talking about using force as leverage. And once you've done that, any future climb down turns into a credibility crisis. Trump has declared a short deadline and made strikes part of the negotiation. So any deal that looks like anything other than total Iranian surrender will get sold by his opponents as weakness, and any delay beyond his own deadline will get sold as failure. So the only live question left is what deal even means anymore. If the US is not asking for zero enrichment in talks while the public demand structure implies dismantlement plus missiles plus regional policy, then the end state is either a narrower agreement than the slogans or no agreement at all. Which is why the limited strike pitch is such an obvious con. A strike designed to compel compliance has to be large enough to hurt. And once it hurts, it invites retaliation. And once retaliation happens, the president is no longer choosing between deal and strike. He's choosing between escalation and stopping. Stopping after you've invited retaliation is the part that will make you look very weak to the very audience you were trying to impress. This is Trump's favorite mistake in its purest form. Dominance confused with control. He can dominate a press conference. He can dominate a headline cycle. He cannot dominate the physics of missiles and bases and sea lanes, and he cannot dominate the fact that other states respond to threats by hardening, dispersing, and preparing to hit back. That's the final consequence underneath every other consequence here. Trump has taken diplomacy and stapled it to a threat of violence in public. Iran's taken that threat and attacked a declared retaliation framework to it in public. And the UK is being dragged into the basing question in public as well. The room for quiet off-ramps has been squeezed out by the very people pretending they're creating leverage. And the next move is going to sit inside that squeeze now. The only honest way to read it is still the same way. Trump has tried to turn deal into submission and tried to use a deadline and regional military posture to force it. And the price is that he either walks back his own ultimatum and wears the humiliation, or he pushes into force and has to own the chain of events that follows. And neither option will give him the clean strongman ending that he loves to portray, that he wants to sell, because the posture he's built doesn't control other people, it binds him, ties his own hands. It's just the latest round of threats all imploding on the tangerine tyrant. But for more on how his Iran antics are blowing up in his face, check out this story here as well. Please also hit like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I will hopefully catch you on the next one. Cheers, folks.
Which now instead, of course, as a little warning perhaps. At the same time, the United States continues to accumulate more assets, especially than the US, as Gerald Ford, which has just entered yesterday, I think, the Mediterranean Sea. So with so many assets, it's hard to see this being reversed, as there's very difficult for Trump to find an off-ramp. I was wondering how you're seeing the situation now. Is it how severe is this?
From the very beginning, it was clear that we're heading towards a major confrontation, although we don't know if it's actually going to be aggression, military aggression or not, because it's Trump. That it was clear that the Israeli regime, the Zionist lobby, and the Epstein class that rules over the West, that they will do or want to do or wish to do anything possible to help the Zionist regime. And we saw how the U.S. ambassador to Israel basically said that if the regime takes the whole of the region, it's fine. And that, I think, is something that we Iranians have been saying all along for many, many years. And others have been trying to hide this, both in the region and beyond. And of course, the reason why there's so much antagonism towards Iran, towards Hezbollah, towards Ansarullah, towards the resistance in Iraq, and of course, towards the Palestinian people, is that they are the only ones who are standing in the way of the greater Israel project. All the other countries, whether it's Erdogan or the Emirates or the Egyptian government and so on, Qatar and others, Jordan and so on, they are a part of the American empire. And therefore, they will not make any move to prevent the Israeli regime from making progress until possibly when it's far too late. But Iran is not going to back down. And I do not see a scenario where the Americans win any potential war. The Iranians have said that they will shut down the Strait of Hormuz. It will not be a last resort measure. In the 12-day war, there was no need for Iran to shut down oil and gas trade in the region. Because the war was largely between Iran and the Israeli regime, the Americans carried out a token strike. They didn't obviously obliterate the nuclear program, but it wasn't enough to justify destroying the global economy. Iran does not want the global economy, excuse me, Iran does not want the global economy to suffer. Iran has friends across the world, and ordinary people in all countries want to live in peace and maintain uh, the ability to make money and to raise kids and have families and have decent communities. So Iran, even though the regimes in the Persian Gulf region all host U.S. bases and were all helping the Israeli regime during the 12-day war through those bases, through allowing the Americans to use those bases, Iran, since it saw it could easily manage the war and defeat the Israeli regime, and ultimately the regime had to seek a ceasefire to end the war, it did not even contemplate moving in that direction. However, if the United States carries out an attack on Iran, that would be a different thing altogether. This would be an existential threat, and this would be a war for survival. It would be a war of choice for the Americans. It would be done for the Israeli regime, obviously. But in this scenario, Iran will do everything to protect itself. And since all these countries in these tiny Arab family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf region are hosting U.S. bases, and as you and I speak, those bases are being used to plan against Iran, then Iran has every right to shut down the oil and gas trade, and that will not be a measure of last resort. That will happen at the very beginning.
Well, this is a good point. If this is a war, existential threat, or war of survival, as you say, it makes sense that Iran would play its cards very differently. And well, the Gulf states obviously seem like this is unavoidable to be pulled in. But how else do you see the United States coming in? Because the whole element of surprise will be difficult to do now, that they'll be building up in these amounts. The rhetoric has clearly indicated that this is the intention. I mean, when assessing threats, you're looking at the intentions and capabilities. They're all pointing toward an attack, which wouldn't, could happen even over the next a few days. So, do you see any other possible elements of surprise they could introduce? I mean, would they use foreign fighters coming in from abroad to sabotage? Do they have the same networks within Iran which can disrupt? Can they attack through Azerbaijan? How are you seeing the element of surprise? Because I think this will be very critical for the United States to be successful. And again, with all the power or the military hardware it's been occurring in the region, if it has the element of surprise as well, this could be important. I would necessarily say decisive.
Iran's intelligence is quite effective. It knows what goes on more or less in surrounding countries. And inside the country, we saw the United States and the Israeli regime and British intelligence and possibly the French carry out an armed rebellion, a semi-coup in the country, something that they admitted, although Western media pretends that this was all about peaceful protesters. It was obviously not the case. We've seen endless footage of extreme violence carried out by the rioters and terrorists and the trained rioters. And we saw clear admissions by the U.S. Secretary of Treasury, by the Mossad in their Persian language statement, by Pompeo about both Israeli involvement, and later on he admitted U.S. involvement. And of course, Israeli Channel 14, close to Netanyahu, which said that foreign agencies brought in weapons to kill hundreds of Iranian police and security officials. So it's clear as day, while they're gloating about what they did, Western media pretends that none of this has happened and just inflate numbers, even though the West and the Israeli regime in particular are responsible for the bloodshed. They inflate the numbers and try to blame and say that the Iranians are killing peaceful protesters to justify death and discussion and destruction and massacre. They want to help build the case for war, whether it's the Guardian or Fox News. It doesn't make a difference. But after that, we saw that on after January the 9th and the 10th, when this armed insurrection took place and immediately collapsed. And then we saw people come twice to the streets in defense of the state and the Constitution, both on January the 12th and on February the 11th in even bigger numbers. I think it's clear that the United States has no capability, nor the Israeli regime, to do anything substantial inside the country. And neighboring countries are far too vulnerable. Aliyev in Azerbaijan is very vulnerable. He's a dictator. He's not capable of harming Iran. In fact,
How it feels to have a TurboTax expert do your self-employed taxes for just $150.
it's the other way around is quite possible. And if he pushes too hard in his alliance with the Israeli regime, I think it's quite possible that he will be overthrown with the help of Iran. So I think he would probably he probably is very nervous right now. And that's why he's constantly traveling to the United States and taking part in peace board and all that sort of nonsense with Trump. Actually, I think it's clear that it is really the other way around. Iran's allies across the region are being prepared. In Iraq, the resistance knows that an attack on Iran, an existential attack on Iran, is an existential attack on Iraq for obvious reasons. In Yemen, the same is true. And these are countries that have enormous populations. U.S. allies in the region are all family dictatorships. And some of them are quite insignificant and small in their capabilities, like Qatar, which has a passport holding population of 350, 400,000. The Emirates, a passport population holding the passport holding population is 1.4 million, and the number of foreigners, for mostly adult males, are in the Emirates is like 10 million or so, I suppose. So they are very vulnerable and weak. Yet Iraq, with a population of 45 to 47 million, for example, can't be compared to Bahrain or Kuwait or anything like that. So if it's going to be a regional war, it's not to the benefit of the United States. It's something that Trump cannot manage. And Iran is also preparing its firepower too. The United States is bringing in everything that it has, but Iran is also preparing everything that it has too. And the fact that oil and gas go through the Persian Gulf, or they leave West Asia and the Caucasus, that gives Iran a huge advantage. And in addition to all that, I think there's the fact that none of these family dictatorships are very stable. None of them have real popular support. In some of these countries, the overwhelming majority are foreigners. So a war could actually change the map of the region. And you may see that some of these pro-Trump regimes will fall. War will be devastating, no doubt. And sitting here in Tehran, obviously, I recognize and people here recognize what it could mean, but it is not Iran that wants to carry out aggression. It is Trump and Netanyahu. and of course the collective West, which supports all acts of aggression, including genocide in Gaza. So, what Iran can do and will do is that it and its allies will hit as hard as possible. They will bring down the global economy, and I think ultimately what will happen after great devastation across the region is that Trump will fail, he will fall, and the Israeli regime and the regime in Washington will be blamed for the catastrophe that befalls the entire world. Because when oil and gas prices go through the roof during such uncertain times, and I know you've discussed this on your show, how the global economy and the U.S. economy in particular are facing major challenges. This would be catastrophic at under any circumstances, a war of this nature. But under these circumstances, it would be even more devastating. And I think that people in the United States, the MAGA crowd, which now, of course, has no problem with endless wars. It has no problem with shooting white women in the face, or shooting white nurses in the back who take care of uh, veterans. The MAGA crowd, who they don't care about Epstein and all his crimes. Uh, when their pockets are badly hit, when they lose their jobs, when factories shut down, when businesses go bankrupt, I think they will be the first to seek out those who are pushing for war.
Nathan Watkins doesn't believe in limits, especially limits on your property taxes. Watkins testified against Governor Abbott's property tax caps, saying,
"Tax caps or revenue caps?"
Nathan Watkins, he's reckless and he'll leave you in his dust.
Are you researching dental implants?
There's a lot of dental offices that'll talk about doing their teeth in the day process.
It's quite extraordinary to see them in such short time, in 1 year, how the MAGA crowd has changed. I mean, I was quite sympathetic to Trump's arguments during the campaign, that is ending the forever wars, reindustrializing, all of these things. But the monstrosity that has evolved out of this is, well, it's the exact opposite. So it's very strange to see the support continuing, even though the policies have been put on its head. But in terms of the Israeli media, though, I mean, say what you will about the Israelis, at least their media, they tends to be a lot more honest than the Western, I feel, especially the Hebrew language. They're quite open about their participation in instigating the insurrection, coordinating it from abroad, supplying the weapons, also the objectives. While the Americans and Europeans talk about nuclear deal, they're quite honest. That's not what we want. We want, for Iran to be weakened, ideally destroyed. So you do see a very different. Let's celebrate it as honest. but I'm curious though. What is what is the objective here, though, for the Americans attacking Iran? Because they won't commit ground troops, and again, that would be a disaster of its own. But they talk about regime change, but there's no replacement government. Some talk about destroying the nuclear program, but that's allegedly been obliterated. I just don't see a story here. How, even best case, if they get their objectives, what exactly is achieved? They can deliver, as you said, a lot of death and destruction to Iran. Of course, Iran can deal a heavy blow against the United States and its allies as well. But I don't see at the end of this security being enhanced for the United States. They're not going to walk away from this stronger. So what is the objective here in terms of, what to expect when the strikes comes in? Because it seems, well, predictable. They're going to go after political leadership, military leadership. But how will this success be defined? Because I'm watching, our different, our own journalists reporting on Iran, which means that they're sitting in Syria where they're celebrating the former success, and it's telling us what they're hearing from Iran. I mean, it's a bit, it's parody, but 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 I was wondering how you see this, the objectives.
Yes, and of course, Trump also said that he was the one who brought Jolani or Ashara to power. I mean, everything now is everyone has been exposed. And regional allies of the United States, Turkey and Jordan and Qatar and others, they've all been exposed to those who want to open eyes. So those who don't want to open their eyes, they will remain closed until the end of their days. But everything is clear who stands with who and who is actually supporting the Palestinian people, who is actually opposing genocide, who's actually actively opposing genocide. It's those entities that are being punished by the collective West and those entities that are always antagonized by Western allies in the region, whether it's Qatar through their immense gas money or others through their immense oil money or through Erdogan, who gets gas money from Qatar to carry out his both propaganda operations and his military operations and his support for ISIS and Al Qaeda and other such terror groups. I think you touched upon a key point, and that is that the United States has not brought in ground troops. And if it wants to carry out a war with Iran, it will have to bring in maybe 1.5 million soldiers, which would, I think, on its own wreck the US economy. It's probably not even doable. But without that, the United States loses the war because the Iranians are on the ground and Iran's allies are on the ground in Iraq, in Yemen, and elsewhere. And of course, in these dictatorships in the region, as I said, there are millions of people who are slaves, effectively, or indentured servants, and workers who have very few, if any, rights. And if there's chaos, if these countries, uh, their economies go downhill very fast, I can envisage a situation where the ruling families will be overthrown. In fact, I don't think they'll stand. I don't think they'll stay. They're probably already leaving. Many of the people around them, or their families, or some of the princes, they're probably already in their palaces in Europe and North America, waiting to see what happens. So, without a huge ground presence, how's the United States going to even defeat Iran? They can kill Iranians. They can't bring about regime change. Whoever they murder can be replaced. We have a constitution. Everything is clear as day. The country will be managed until the war comes to an end, and people will defiantly resist. And but after it starts, the United States can't stop it without losing face. So when the price of oil and gas go through the roof, when the United States starts giving casualties, so when its loyal proxies in the region begin to wobble and collapse, uh, how is Trump going to retreat, or how is he going to uh, shift away or move away from conflict and present himself as a victor? He won't be able to do so, and it's at a time, all this, when the situation is terribly bad for the United States anyway. We saw what happened with the Supreme Court yesterday. We've seen the conflict inside the United States over ICE and the murders carried out by ICE. We've seen how the gap between rich and poor in the United States is growing, how the Epstein class, most importantly, has been exposed, but has also been shown to be above the law, and it will remain above the law as things stand. All of this is going to cause the Trump to be in a very, very difficult situation. In fact, I would say it would be more than difficult, an impossible position. So this is not like 2003, where Western media back then could mobilize support for a war and the US government could get away with it. The American people are not as gullible as they were back then. They've seen the genocide in Gaza, they've seen the Epstein, well, a little bit of the Epstein files. But and when the economy collapses, I think that Trump will be in an impossible position. And as I said, it's the resistance that has troops on the ground, not the United States. Yemen today is much stronger than it was a year ago. Even when the United States carried out its 7-week war against Yemen and failed, that Yemen is different from this Yemen. In Iraq, the resistance is preparing itself. We've already seen them reveal underground bases full of drones and other capabilities. So it's not as if the United States is the only side that is preparing for war. The other side is preparing, but they also have ground forces in large numbers, and they have the ability to destroy everything in the Persian Gulf and on the other side of the Persian Gulf and in the Caucasus. And there's nothing that the United States can do about that. Not absolutely nothing. If anyone looks at the map, they'll see that the Persian Gulf is not very wide. Iran does not need its long-range missiles that it used against the Israeli regime and force it to beg for a ceasefire. It has hundreds of thousands of drones that could strike anything in the Persian Gulf. Oil rigs, ports, petrochemical facilities, refineries, tankers, of course, and other cargo ships, gas wells, oil wells, everything can be destroyed. And it would take many years to restore them. The longer the war lasts, if after 3 days, it'll be far worse than 2 days because it'll be irreversible. After 4 or 5, 6 days, it'll just get worse and worse. And even when the war comes to an end, it will take a lot more time to restore these capabilities. And no doubt the Iranians will be demanding compensation from these regimes anyway for hosting those US bases. So I don't see how the United States could win. It's not possible. They can slaughter people, and they will. We saw how the Israelis bombed apartment blocks, and Western media pretended that these were precision strikes because they have no sense of morality. They have no sense of humanity. They are tools of the Epstein class. So Trump will bomb and slaughter. We saw last night the Israelis murder a large number of Lebanese children and an entire family as they were breaking their fast. No one in the West cares. In Gaza, they're slaughtering every day. No one cares. I mean, in the ruling class, in the media, the Epstein class, and those who work for them across the Western world. So they won't care when Trump bombs civilian infrastructure and murders ordinary Iranians. But that won't bring the United States victory. This will all lead to defeat, and it will just be a matter of time when Trump will be forced to declare some fake victory and retreat. But everyone will know that the failure is his. I'm not for certain that I'm not sure that there will be war, and I'm not for war, but this is what I believe will happen. There will be destruction, a lot of destruction in Iran, because the United States and Israeli regime and Western regimes in general are all ruthless and inhumane. And we've seen that from the Epstein documents, what the nature of this crowd. But I think that the damage that will be done to the global economy will be far greater. When factories shut down, when businesses shut down, the building may still be there, but it'll be an empty building. And so then you will see, I think,
Have you been wondering how people turn side hustles into full-blown online businesses that make money while they sleep? I'm Penny with Jotform, and in this video, we'll walk through how to start an e-commerce business from scratch.
People across the world on the move. Places in Latin America, they're upset about immigration. The movement of people will be far greater than ever before in Africa and Asia. Even though Europe and North America will be in crisis mode themselves, but those are the traditional destinations. So there are so many bad things that can happen to the world, but Iran is going to defend itself. It's not Iran that has brought about this situation. It's not Iran that's engaging in genocide in Gaza. It's not Iran that is pushing for war. In fact, the reason why Iran is negotiating is partially to see if the United States is sane enough to have an acceptable deal. But even more importantly, what Iran is doing is it's telling the world that it's not us, it's them. So when the global economy goes down, everyone knows who to blame.
I guess the source of my pessimism, though, is with all this military hardware moving in and all this chest beating, it's impossible almost then to step down to again, as I began saying, finding this off ramp. Of course, as Trump suggests, all of this is to push Iran into a deal, but as you said, Iran is negotiating, but the whole question is, well, what kind of deal can actually be made here? At this point, some critics would say that the negotiations they appear to be a fraud. They're so far apart, and even what's on the table to be negotiated is not even agreed yet. Do you see the same problem with the negotiations? Are they too far apart, or do you think a deal could be made if Trump wants a victory to pull this whole thing back? I mean,
Well, Iran is not going.
JCPOA, for example.
Well, the thing is that the United States is not so far from its public comments. It's not talking about a JCPOA. It's talking about Iran's regional allies. That's off the table. Iran won't discuss them. It's talking about Iran's military capabilities. That's off the table. Iran won't discuss them. It's talking about, in public at least, Iran giving up its nuclear program and its right to enrichment. All of that is off the table. But and a sign of Iran's strength and its position was what we saw during that show in Turkey when the United States was calling for the negotiations to be held there, and Turkey, of course, being a NATO entity. And then we saw from Al Jazeera a Turkish, Egyptian, Qatari proposal, which was quite disgusting, where Iran would stop supporting its regional allies, including Hamas, which shows that none of these three entities are supportive of the Palestinian resistance. In reality, they're just, they're in the U.S. camp and reducing its military defense capabilities and so on, and its nuclear program. But Iran said no, and Iran said it will only negotiate with Americans, not in some group with at some table with multiple countries, and that it will only negotiate in Oman. And ultimately, the Americans were forced to accept that. And the indirect talks that were held in Oman and then in Europe, but still with Omani mediation, showed that Iran, how firm Iran is in its position. But then again, we also have to remember that this is highly symbolic for Iran too. Iran is trying to remind everyone by restarting the indirect talks in Oman that this already happened once. And before the 12-day war, Iran and the United States had indirect talks. After the first round, as you recall, the United States accepted Iran's right to enrichment. Witkoff went on Fox News and admitted as such. And then in round two, they moved the goalposts, and 3, 4, the U.S. kept moving the goalposts at the insistence of the Zionist lobby, obviously, and ultimately the United States. It turned out it was conspiring with the Israeli regime all along, and it was being deceitful, and it carried out an attack. So the negotiations now uh, that are taking place are of the same nature. The Iranians are not going to be fooled by the Americans, and they're telling the world that basically that we did this before, and we all recall what happened back then. Uh, I can't say what will happen. Iran, though, is preparing for war, and every day it is preparing further. Iran's capabilities today are significantly greater than they were during the 12-day war. The 12-day war was very helpful for Iran to discover its weaknesses and to improve its strengths. And since then, Iran has been working very hard on high-tech capabilities, air defenses, drone defenses, and of course, improving its offensive capabilities. But again, I would like to stress that the difference between the 12-day war and this war are on two fronts. One is that this will be a regional war. This will be a game changer. The second is that overwhelmingly, Iran's capabilities are directed towards the United States, not towards Israel. The long-range missiles that are directed towards occupied Palestine and the Mediterranean are necessary for entities that are far away. But Iran has far larger numbers of middle-range and short-range missiles and drones that can strike anything across the Persian Gulf region and the Indian Ocean. And those missiles are far larger in number and much more easy to move around. You don't need these big launchers. The same is true with the drones. And those underground bases that are spread out across the southern and central parts of Iran, they've been created or they've been building them since the United States invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, and when Iran was declared the axis of evil, and Bush and then Obama started saying all options are on the table. So Iran's firepower that's directed towards the United States and its proxies and its assets in the region are far greater than what it used against the Israeli regime. And of course, Iran can still use those long-range missiles, which are now much larger in number, more precise, and with bigger payloads.
It's a good point to make about this changing the goalpost, because
President Trump trusts retired teacher Terry Leo Wilson because she's teaching liberals a lesson in Austin. Leo Wilson banned DEI programs in
the negotiation tactic from Washington now, it is quite strange, especially given that Trump has sold himself as this ultimate deal maker. You see some similarities with the negotiations with the Russians. That is, they met in Anchorage, they made this basic deal, they recognized that the Russians made some painful concessions, and then once they have this in place, then they start to move the goalposts. Well, how about a little bit more? And after a while, the foundation of that original deal is all but gone. It reminds me a bit, well, less of a political negotiator and more of a real estate deal, where the real estate agent will call the buyer or the seller, just have to move it a little bit more, a little bit this direction. And, essentially the former talk was all meaningless. Well, given that they are real estate negotiators, it is not, I guess, it could be a suitable analogy. But I wanted to ask, though, about Britain allegedly blocking America's use of Diego Garcia for an attack on Iran. Again, this is quite an important piece in the puzzle for the Americans, if they can then strike Iran from the south. And I was wondering what you make of this. Is this simply the divisions brewing between the UK and the US over other issues? Is this actually about what the British say, their concern for international law? is an effort by the British. Yes, I my reaction was the same when I read that official reasoning. Or is it an effort to stay out of this? Or again, alternatively, could also be attempted as deception against Iran. Don't worry about this direction. We're not going to hit you from Diego Garcia. But how are you seeing this? Because it is unusual for the U.S. to not have the unconditional support from the British.
Yes, it would be unusual, and that's why I think the Iranians are basically going to view this as deception. Uh, it may be something else, but that's not something that the Iranians are going to think about in their planning. There are lots of very strange things happening. If you watch the Iranian foreign minister's interview on an American morning program, he was saying that at the negotiating table, the Americans were not demanding zero enrichment. And so this could be one of two things. Either the United States is putting on a show or trying to put pressure on Iran, but it wants a deal. And so at the table, it's doing something very different. At the negotiating table, it's behaving very differently than what's happening across the region and what it's saying in the media and in public. Or this could be deception again. And that the United States, the talks were fake, are fake. And just like they were before the 12-day war, it was clear that the talks were a form of deception. So I think for the Iranians, the safest bet is to just take everything as deception. The British have always been good poodles, the British government, of course, good poodles to the United States. There's no reason to think that they will behave differently this time round. If they do, it's not something that the Iranians are going to plan for. They're going to plan for the worst. Just like at the negotiating table, if the United States is behaving reasonably, Iran will continue to negotiate. But that is not going to change Iran's plans. And it is assuming that there will be war, that Diego Garcia will be used, that the United States will carry out or try to carry out a sudden attack. It may happen tonight. It may happen tomorrow night. It may happen next week. It may happen in 2 weeks. But what is clear is that the window of opportunity for the United States is not all that long because the expenses incurred by the Trump regime are huge, and they will be. It will be very difficult for them to sustain this for very long. For Iran, this is its own home turf, and therefore the costs are much more limited. And Iran can wait the U.S. out. So the Iranians are waiting for war, but they will continue to negotiate because last time round, even though Western media collectively were supporting the Israeli aggression, and I think after Gaza, Western media has been fully exposed, and anything that they say about Iran is just nonsense, or about Lebanon, or about Palestinians. It's all nonsense. I think people have reached that stage where they recognize that, except for maybe 70-year-old Americans or 60-year-old Americans, but or Europeans. But I think
Nathan Watkins doesn't believe in limits, especially your property taxes. Watkins tests government's property tax caps, saying
back then it was quite clear, it was evident that across the global south and inside Iran too, the fact that Iran was at the negotiating table and the United States chose to attack helped Iran a lot. It helped enhance Iran's support across the world and strengthen resolve among ordinary Iranians at home. So even though because some people are saying, why are you negotiating? This is just a lie. This is just deception. Quite possibly. But Iran is not going to be fooled. Iran is negotiating because it wants the world to see that it's not Iran that's going to carry out aggression. If there is war and Iran is not negotiating, of course, Iran's carrying out indirect negotiations. If there's war, then Western media will say, well, if the Iranians had negotiated, this would not have happened. Because Western media has no, these journalists, mainstream journalists, they have no sense of dignity or honor or honesty. We see it in the numbers that they write about, peaceful protesters, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands killed. They're basically just trying to prepare the ground for war. That's their job. Again, whether it's The Guardian or Independent or MSNBC or Fox News and Breitbart and Sky News, they're all the same. They're all the same. One is more subtle, sophisticated, one is more bombastic, but they're all the same. So they will go out and say, well, this could have been avoided if only Iran had talked. So Iran is not going to give them that opportunity. Iran is going to show the world and ordinary Iranians that we tried. If it works, fine. If it doesn't, it hurts the Americans.
Yeah, no, I wish I could disagree about the media, but I find it troubling the way this is reported, because when they're now building the case for war in the media, they're essentially repeating the same thing. That is, the tens of thousands of civilians were slaughtered by the regime. We have to do something. This is, it's the usual humanitarian intervention argument being pushed. But the media has a role here, because only today the foreign minister of Iran, he tweeted out that Iran had it already released this list of all the victims during the insurrection, which amounted to 3,117. But that included, of course, all the officers and government officials who had been murdered. So if you're a journalist and your job is to inform the public, indeed, you look for what is true and of public interest. What you want to go and do then is go through this list, and then if there are names, in this tens of thousands which aren't on this list, okay, well, bring it forth, and then you can expose if this is not truthful. But if you just ignore what is happening on the other side because you fear that could undermine the narrative for selling a war to justify the war that's coming, you're not a journalist at all. You are a war propagandist. Again, this is the fact that no one is responding to this, that they're not investigating it. Indeed, that just this dismissal that, well, this is Iran, everything they say is propaganda. There's no point to even take it because it's serious. It's it's not great for the journalistic practices. So let's choose the words in this way. Just a last question though. You said that Iran.
One point that I'd like to add here, and that is they do the exact opposite. The independent journalists that came to Iran for the February 11th celebrations of the 47th anniversary of the victory of the revolution, they saw massive protests or demonstrations in support of the Constitution. 4 million people came to the streets in Tehran alone, and there were tens of millions across the country. They came to see, because during after the deadly riots or the semi-coup attempt, the armed insurrection on January the 8th and 9th, there were mass demonstrations across Iran against the rioters, and there were up to 3 million people in Tehran. And Musk and the West, they were saying this is AI. They showed helicopter footage of the crowd in Tehran, which was massive, and they were trying to pretend that this is AI. So on February the 11th, we saw independent journalists coming to Iran.
How the economic machine works in 30 minutes. The economy works like a simple machine, but many.
And they went and saw the protests, and the people in Tehran, came in even larger numbers, probably because they saw how Elon Musk and Western media were trying to downplay the real numbers. So the rally in Tehran and everywhere else was larger. And but those independent journalists, Western journalists who went back, they're now being attacked and smeared, and because they went to Iran and exposed how, in fact, people are not with these terrorists and with these, the Pahlavi and the MEK terror group and the separatists and all those people funded by Western intelligence agencies. And that people do not believe their fake numbers of, many thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands. And yes, if they had any integrity, they would say, okay, let's let's see the names and compare them and see what other names we have. They won't do that because they don't have such names, and that's not the objective. Again, no one should be fooled. There's no difference between the BBC, the Guardian, the Times, or Breitbart and the New York Times. They're all one and the same. They're owned by the Epstein class, and they are there for propaganda purposes. These are the people who've been whitewashing the ongoing genocide in Gaza, the slaughter of Palestinians and Lebanese. Again, yesterday the Israelis carried out horrific massacres across Lebanon, killing children, but that's not of interest to the Western media. So they have no credibility, and Iran is, I think Iran recognizes that the best way to deal with them is to is to focus on the global majority and ordinary people in the West who are seeing the reality increasingly, and the Western media obviously does not have the influence that it had a couple of decades ago. It is deteriorated, it has declined very rapidly, and Gaza was a turning point. So Iran has lots of support across the world, and people across the world, many people across the world, don't believe the propaganda. And I think that as U.S. propaganda capabilities and Western propaganda capabilities decline, their military capabilities decline, their economic capabilities decline, it's going to get worse for them and more difficult. And if they carry out war with Iran, I think we will see a very rapid collapse of the Western or U.S. empire, much more rapid than we were expecting.
Yeah, no, I have quite a few problems over here myself for interviewing people like you, which I'm accused of assisting regime propaganda for Iran. So it's no the yeah it's no not well, you can smell the no well the desperation there when one loses narrative control, and what happens to free speech under those conditions. But the last question I had for you, though, was you mentioned before that Iran is just now waiting for the war to begin, which, well, it seems not to be unavoidable, but it seems that it's coming now. But at the same time, I'm also watching all these Chinese satellite pictures showing all the concentration of the American military hardware. And, when you mentioned that Iran's waiting, are there any discussions or considerations about preemptive strikes? Again, I just want to make it clear, I'm not advocating anything. I'm very curious about the strategic thinking in Iran. That is, if this is, as you said, an existential threat, a war for survival, there's this unprecedented military hardware being lined up all around Iran. The capabilities are there, the intentions are clear, and there's a strategic benefit in striking first. Is this entering the strategic discourse in Iran? Again, you can say it's better to be attacked first, so it's Iran doesn't get accused of an unprovoked attack on the U.S. But on the other hand, who strikes first can be quite critical. I'm just curious if this is a discussion at all in Iran at the moment.
This is a key point, actually. Iran, based on its religion, especially in Shia Islam, it will not initiate war. Just like Iran never produced chemical weapons when the West was giving Saddam Hussein chemical weapons to use extensively against Iranians, according to the religious views of the Iranian leadership, those chemical weapons are not moral, so they never produce them. The same was true with nuclear weapons. Iran could have had nuclear weapons many, many years ago. Iran has had that capability for a very long time, but it itself chose not to have them. Of course, the Iranians have also said that if the fate of the nation is at stake, then they would change their nuclear posture. But in any case, that is this is all based on their religious belief. But what we are seeing now is a situation where the Iranians are saying that we'll not wait to be hit first. As soon as we're sure that we're confident that an attack is happening, we will strike. And that, of course, creates enormous danger too, because if the United States could do something stupid and create misunderstanding and start a war through its stupidity. Because again, we're not for sure. It's not clear that the United States wants a war yet. We're assuming they do, but we don't know because the Zionists want the war. We're assuming that will happen, but we don't really know. It could go either way. So the United States may carry out some sort of stupid provocation, or send a large number of planes into the air, and then the Iranians will interpret that as the preparation for attack, and then the Iranians will strike. So Iran is not going to wait till the United States carries out its first wave and then respond. So Iran is not going to initiate war. It never has. It's always been, aggression has been carried out against Iran. We saw that when the West encouraged Saddam to invade and then assisted him with all sorts of weapons and funding, especially from these regimes in the Persian Gulf. They too were a part of it. And of course, the Germans were the ones who gave the chemical weapons, which I survived, but many didn't. Then there was the 12-Day War, the sanctions regime, which is a brutal regime. I mean, it's quite stunning, Glenn. It's quite stunning. As you and I are speaking,
contact Robert's Air for all your heating and cooling needs. Whether you need repair, service, or installation, remember Robert's Air, serving Galveston since 2001. Visit us online at robertsairllc.com. That's robertsairllc.com.
It's hard to stop a train.
they are starving Cuba, but the Western media is not talking about it. They are starving kids in Cuba, women and kids, and imposing a siege. And even this, Trump alluded to this in his when he was lashing out um, at the Supreme Court. He alluded to what he's doing in countries like Cuba, but he was, I think, alluding to Cuba in particular. Quite a few admissions were made in that in a few, during the last few hours about Jolani, about strangling countries, about all sorts of things. But the point is that as we speak, Western media is now focused on dehumanizing Iran and Iranians and trying to portray it as utterly evil to prepare the grounds for war. But their government is strangling the people of Cuba, 10 million people, and they won't even talk about it. So, this is where we are right now. This is the world that we live in. It's It's a war. It's a world where the Epstein class has exposed itself, and it is now functioning out in the open. And Trump is the most important representative of the Epstein class. So it's really in the world today, it is the axis of resistance against the Epstein class, and I have no doubt that the Islamic Republic of Iran and the axis of resistance, whose sin is opposing genocide, whose sin is that they are the only ones, the only states, the only entities that are actively opposing genocide. They're saying don't kill Palestinian kids, they're not Amalek. That's their sin, and I have no doubt that they will persevere.
Yeah, now for a class which has this collective identity and legitimizes all action based on humanitarianism, it is quite shocking that one can't even talk about Cuba, that it doesn't even appear in the media. But yeah, there we are. So, well, thank you for taking the time, and yes, please stay safe. This looks like it could be some very dangerous days ahead.
We do what we have to do, and I will
And as a matter of fact, it's whether Iran truly understand that this time is also very different. And in conclusion of this analysis, I'm going to share one question for you pertaining to this particular aspect. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by talking about Iran and Russia naval drills. Then I'll move into Donald Trump, a 10-day ultimatum, if I may use the term here. So what happened recently? As of yesterday, the 19th, Iran and Russia launched joint naval drills in the southern part of Iran. The drill took place and I have some pictures here I'm going to be sharing with you as I explain a few things here. The drills took place in the Strait of Hormuz, the Gulf of Oman, and the northern Indian Ocean. And those are three locations very, very strategic and interesting to understand. And this is where you have the Russian corvette, the Stoichkoi. Actually, I looked at one of the pictures for you, so you have an idea of it. This is the Russian Navy Stoichkoi. That's a helicopter carrier also that participated in this. What's interesting is that China does not appear to be involved in this current drill. There was a lot of confusion out there that the Chinese are part. No. The Chinese weren't part of this. Technically, just to clear up the confusion here, the confusion is understandable from some. The broader maritime security belt, this is the trilateral between Russia, China, and Iran. And this started in 2019. And that was originally an Iranian initiative, except in 2021, if I recall, China did not participate. But this one is slightly different here. This time, China didn't participate in the drills themselves. It was just Russia and Iran. And this is why it is described as some sort of small but symbolic. This is what a former Iranian naval officer described them. So I just wanted to clear this up for you here. So the bilateral drills between Iran and Russia, smaller and more symbolic than the broader trilateral framework suggests. And there are those who argue that, well, even with Russia participation, they cannot imagine that Russia will offer real support in direct confrontation between Iran and the United States. I have to push back against that argument, because there are, again, those who argue that, well, maybe Russia is just using Iran as a leverage in its broader standoff with the West, meaning the Russian standoff with the West as well. I don't think so in this one here. This is slightly different, because Russia understands the changing dynamics in the landscape. And because the three countries, Russia, Iran, and China, this is what constitutes the core of the new multipolar order. And Russia does not want to be left behind without having a say into that. What's interesting about these drills is the timing of it. I have a picture for you right here. One of the interesting aspects of these drills between Russia and Iran is that it follows Iran's launch of 5 missiles towards the Strait of Hormuz on the day before. And those launches struck targets as part of a larger scale maritime exercises that Iran conducted. Once again, the timing of it is crucial. And of course, you have to add the statements of the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei when he said that the capabilities of Iran of sinking a carrier, the U.S. Carrier strike, or the aircraft carrier, I'm sorry, that is within reach. Why? Because Iran might have something. You put the two and two together and you figured, okay, if Iran is doing this 5 missile launch towards the Strait of Hormuz and conducting the day after drills with Russia, all this is what they came up with, that operation that is called smart control of the Hormuz Strait. This is where you have to put this in perspective. Russia showing its naval assets as part of this, it highlights something for us, and it's worth addressing. So I'm going to share a clip with you here briefly. Actually, the thing is, this clip is in English, so I don't need to do a translation for you here. So let's take a listen here, please. Okay, here we go.
Do you want to build an app and you're not a developer? Well, let me show you how to build it with JotForm apps. In this video, we're going to cover from beginner to
Iran and Russia will launch a joint naval exercise in the Sea of Oman and the northern Indian Ocean on Thursday, according to spokesperson for the drill, Rear Admiral Hassan Maqsoodloo. The exercise is aimed at boosting security and strengthening durable maritime interactions in the region. He says expanding joint maritime cooperation, especially in protecting commercial ships and tankers, as well as combating maritime terrorism, is among the main goals of the drill. Iran's Navy official made the remarks during his visit to the Russian Navy's helicopter carrier Stoysky, which docked in Iran's southern waters. Russia's Naval Force Commander, Captain Alexei Sergeyev, for his part, praised the close ties between the two countries, saying both navies are prepared for specialized drills, including maritime counterterrorism operations.
All right, I'm going to stop right there. And why is this important also? Because you have to understand where the Russians are coming from. Russians also have to think about access to water. And this is why they decide to do it. It's symbolic. And the next question we have to ask is to whom the message is sent. I know everybody's going to say is the US. Yes, that's part of it. But it's more than that. So I'm going to divide it into three parts here. This message. First one is to the United States, the primary audience, meaning us, Americans. And to me, in my opinion, this is the largest or the clearest, the clearest and most direct message. The drills comes as the US officials remain concerned about retaliation against American bases in the Gulf and naval assets operating in a nearby. We're talking about the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain or anything near the Strait of Hormuz. So despite the heightened power or military posturing that is, including the possible arrival of the USS Gerald Ford with the strike group, Trump has publicly maintained some sort of that argument of, well, diplomacy remains the preferred course of action. We don't know. That's Trump. You can't take him for what he says at face value. So the message to Washington within this is this. Any military strike on Iran comes with complications. Russian assets are in these waters. Think carefully. This is what the Iranians are saying. So having the Russian warships in nearby, once again, the optics matter. Having the Russian warships in these waters aimed at possible US attack on Iran could have military and political implications that sort of the American planners will have to address moving forward. They can't assume without that. The second message goes to Trump administration specifically. And this also tied to the nuclear negotiations. The timing is no accident. Yeah, it's no accident. The timing is strategically calculated for this. The drills between Russia and Iran, okay, come as Iranian and American officials said they have made progress in the nuclear talks. I don't believe it. That's just what they say. Being mediated by Oman. But at the same time, aimed at the US military buildup in the region as part of Trump's pressure campaign on Iran. So in this context, within this message, Iran and Russia are essentially saying, you know, Iran is not alone at the negotiating table. It has partners with military reach. Just think about it. And the third message, it's going to Iran's own population. That means the domestic messaging here. What's important about that is that Iran's leadership is also speaking inward to the Iranians. And the way they're doing this, and this is where you have the Iranian Rear Admiral. His name is Shahram Irani. I think I have a picture. Yes, right here. The commanding officer. That's the Rear Admiral Shahram Irani. He warned that the presence of extra-regional fleet in West Asia is unjustified. In quote, by the way. And he's adding also that any or if the extra-regional fleet feels it has come with power, it should know that the Iranian people will confront them with greater power. End of quote. This is his message from the Iranian government to the people. And this, in my opinion, designed to project some sort of resiliency and boost the morale at home in the real economic and military pressure. Then we have one more message here, which is the broader Western alliance and US Gulf partners, specifically Gulf partners. We're looking at United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Bahrain, Kuwait to a degree, and Saudi Arabia to a degree. So here is what the Russian presidential aide, Patrushev, I have a picture of him right here. He framed the Russian involvement as part of building a multipolar world order on the oceans. And this is in response to what he called as Western hegemony. And he also added that BRICS should now be given a full-fledged strategic maritime dimension. That's interesting that he brought BRICS into this conversation. Why? Because it has been questions for the past few years about whether BRICS could have a military, the equivalency of NATO within BRICS. I'm among the first one to say no. As long as you have India there, it won't work. India will undermine you from every corner. And if you are to put the resources, the technology, the manpower, and it gets undermined, it's not worth it. What do you think? Should BRICS have a military unit that is specifically deals with issues pertaining to BRICS countries? No. So just leave me your answer in the chat box. But I found it very interesting that the Russian presidential aide, Patrushev, mentioned BRICS into this. But here is the message that's been sent to US allies, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, which is home of the Fifth Fleet, and others, of course. The message is that the regional order is shifting, and Russia intends to be a permanent naval presence in these waters. Because remember, if you look at the larger picture geographically, so if you move into certain directions as far as the Arabian Sea and others, Russia will have to think in terms of access. So the bottom line, when you think about the meaning of this those naval drills, those drills are fundamentally deterrence. Yeah, they are fundamentally deterrence theater aimed first and foremost at Washington, of course. So, and this also intended for some other objective, and that objective is to complicate US military planning. At the same time, reinforces Iran's leverage in nuclear talks. And I'm going to go far and extend it to even signaling that Moscow stands with Tehran, at least diplomatically and symbolically. I'm going to add one more. And you know what that is? This one has to do with China, with Russia even considering, what if I don't do this and China end up having the upper hand? Because in geopolitics, you have to think in these terms. Remember what I talked about, the secret weapon that Iran might have, which, by the way, I had a picture, and last time I forgot to upload it, so I'm doing it this time around. It's the DF.
In Texas, there are lines you don't cross. Kelly Hancock is fighting for Texans, for Trump and government.
Where is it? No, I didn't have it here. Is the DF-21? Where is? Yeah, no, I don't. Sorry. Is the DF-21? So to Russians, they are thinking in terms, you know what? We're gonna have to show something at least, because with China having 16 cargo with weapons to Iran, that's gonna put Russia on the sideline. And Russia doesn't want to be left behind. This is why they did what they did as a show that we can also be involved inside or in support of Iran. That's just me thinking outside the box. So, but there are those who are saying, well, all this is nothing. Some military analysts in the West here suggesting that all these vessels that Russia is sending and so forth are more of a political factor, no more, no less, than operational ones. So at least for the time being. And I can see that, you know. But the real question we becomes is whether Russia will really fight on behalf of Iran. I don't see that. The common sense would suggest so. Yeah. But its presence alone raises some sort of the cost and risk calculus for any American military action. Because you have to think about it. And when you see the big picture, here is the Russia deploying the Stoichkois, the naval assets here. You have the Chinese deploying some sort of the 055 destroyer. Okay, then the spy ship that I think I had a picture. Not here. So what we can think about is oh, here's the DF-21. This is the Chinese, the carrier killers. So we don't know. So, but just put this in a picture. You have the Russians, Stoichkov, you have the Chinese vessels, and beside the missiles, the surveillance ship to Iran. And of course, what you had 2 days ago when Iran shut down the Strait of Hormuz for a few hours. So to host live fire, part of that live fire were the missiles that were launched. So all this, you put this picture together. And it gives you an idea about how the US is preparing on one end, Iran is preparing on the others. And when you take what's happening on the waters on that side, then you take, on the other hand, the Trump giving 10 days to Iran to reach a meaningful deal in the ongoing talks between the two sides, or face, as Donald Trump said, bad things. The next question becomes for us is Donald Trump bluffing? What do you guys think? By the way, I need to have your input into this conversation here. In your opinion, based on what you know so far and what I have shared with you for the last week and a half, since I've been covering this Iran developments, in your opinion, do you believe Donald Trump is bluffing? And I'm going to take a look later on as I move forward into your responses here. So the military backing is real and substantial. I mean, it's common sense, so, based on facts, based on what we see. And so the U.S. military is, as we speak, is stationing some sort of a vast array of forces in West Asia. They're including the 2 aircraft carrier. As a matter of fact, to my knowledge, the third one might end up joining. Got a word that there is a conversation about a third aircraft carrier is going to be going. So then you have the fighter jets. Then you have the refueling tanks. The USS Abraham Lincoln is already there. Then you have now the USS Gerald Ford, which is, by the way, I had to check something yesterday to find out where the Gerald Ford is. It is, as we speak, on the Gulf of Morocco, but it's left. It's already left, and it's going to cross. It's crossing as we speak, across the Mediterranean on its way. But as of yesterday, it was on the Gulf of Morocco, reached out over there. So I got a picture of the satellite, public satellite, not a government satellite stuff. Salute. She's en route right now. So when you think of the accumulation of the U.S. power, air power, as the largest in the region since the invasion of Iraq. So, and this is where you have one of the, I got a word also from a member of the National Security Council, an official. He did go on a record by semi-officially. What he's saying is that the U.S. military is ready for a potential strike. Get this, guys, as early as tomorrow. It's unlikely, but it's just for it to come from someone from inside the National Security Council with coordination with Trump, the timing is unlikely. I don't know why the person will say this. I can't read his mind or her mind, but it's unlikely. It's unlikely because it will extend beyond this weekend. Trump has not yet made a final decision, because with conversations now described as fluid and ongoing. Don't know. Where the concern is if Israel proceed anything and go ahead and strike Iran, and that's going to have to force the US to get in. Everybody's watching. So, because to me, what you're seeing with the US presence, with the movement now of the Gerald Ford towards that area, with the presence of the Abraham Lincoln already, and some others going to be moving from Diego Garcia, then you have the Gerald Ford, the Abraham Lincoln, and so forth. When you look at all this,
getting a good run here at 6,000 feet, Mount Charleston, 5 miles.
It's not just posturing here. You know, we're talking about the machinery of for a potential strike that could be actively in motion. That's the way I read it as a former military. I read. Now, whether the decision, I've been in the situations where we were ready to go in, whatever. Got the phone call, stand down to the last minute, literally to the last minute. I could see the same scenario here, the possibility. So the question, the question I raised earlier, whether Donald Trump is bluffing or not, we're going to make a case for that. On two sides, there are several factors that suggest Donald Trump is using maximum pressure as a negotiating tool rather than genuinely itching to pull the trigger. In other words, Donald Trump doesn't want to have a war. So, but he has done this before. Trump pulled back from the brink just last month, remember, against Iran, stepping back from attacking Iran. I'm sure you remember, after saying the country agreed to hold the execution of dissidents under US pressure. It has nothing to do with the truth. That wasn't true. What is factual is that Donald Trump has a well-documented pattern of dramatic ultimatums followed by a deal making. Except Donald Trump found out he couldn't pull that nonsense stuff on the Chinese. You all remember with the tariffs? And he ended up, the Supreme Court, by the way, here in the United States, just overruled Donald Trump's on tariffs. Consider them unconstitutional. So, because what Donald Trump was doing with the Chinese, bluffing and threatening them.
Along revolutionary salute to our Queen Yaya's kids for gifting 5 memberships to the Court Figure TV platform. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, Queen. Just try to keep the membership and help the revolution continue. Salute.
That bluff didn't cut it with the Chinese. They pushed back, and we saw the result. We are dealing with the consequences of that. But the talks between US and Iran through a third party are actually progressing. So the Iranian Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, stated that the two sides are making a good progress. I don't buy that either, Mr. Araghchi. I gotta be straightforward here. They were able to reach some sort of a broad agreement on a set of guideline principles. Well, here is the thing. The US now wants the Iran to hold a complete enrichment of the uranium. Even the Iranian president, Pezeshkian, said that Iran might reduce the uranium enrichment. So you have the prime minister saying one thing, you have the president saying one thing. So I don't buy what they're saying as far as the talks are going good. No, because Iran opened the door for itself to be pressured when they agreed to go into this route to begin with. Not like they haven't learned from 2019. Even Trump himself is calling now the talks are very good. So you don't typically bomb a country you just had a very good talk with. This is what Trump is saying. So read between the lines. And there is one other thing that Trump is dealing with domestically, and it's not making itself to the media outside, is there is a congressional resistance to what Trump is planning on doing. So you have now both Democrats, lawmakers, and some Republicans have voiced opposition to any military action against Iran. Even Britain, the UK, Starmer is saying now we'll not allow Americans to take off from the British bases. That tells you the story right there. Whether Trump's going to just go ahead and do the attack without congressional approval, I won't be surprised. We've done it before. So the gap remains enormous. You have part of the cabinet saying one thing, you have other parts of the government is saying otherwise. Because here is one thing. Iran has also some red lines. Because when you have, for example, the Vice President J.D. Vance saying Iran did not address the red lines set by Donald Trump during the Geneva talks. Well, still very far, because they're still very far apart on some of the issues. The U.S. demands now to include curbing uranium enrichment into the talks. They also wanted to include limiting the ballistic missiles, and also wanted Iran to stop support for regional proxies. All of which, in my opinion, to Iran is a red line, non-negotiable.
If you're not using the Opera browser, I don't know what to tell you. Check out Opera browser with Opera AI. It's free, and I'll leave the first link.
The final decision on the timing of D-Day will be mine, and mine alone.
God.
So the bottom line to this is the idea that this is a classic Trump madman theory per se in action, keeping the adversary some sort of genuinely uncertain about whether he will act or not, because that's going to keep some country. I think he tried it with the Chinese, but he learned the hard way. Chinese didn't care. They pushed back. Doesn't matter. Because they told Trump, and I was following this development, they told Trump, sure, we'll negotiate with you once you lift the tariffs. Then we'll talk. Trump couldn't, because if he would have done that, he would lose face. He already lost face. And when the Chinese went ahead and hit back, it's too late. Because the case now with Iran, the threat is credible enough to be taken seriously. The threat of what? We're talking on both sides. The real military assets. So, of course, the U.S. did the prior strike in June 2025 on the nuclear facilities. But the diplomatic track still also is real. You have two tracks. You have a military and a diplomatic one. But you're not going to ignore what the possibility of what surprises Iran might have. And I'm going to talk about this in a second here. And now that Iran has some secret weapons from China, I keep thinking the only thing that came to mind is this DF-21, the carrier killers, because if the United States is going to have 3 aircraft carriers, that's sitting duck right there. Here is what the U.S. is saying. The U.S. officials are saying, well, Iran needs to come back to the Trump administration by the end of the month with a package of steps to address U.S. concerns raised in Geneva. That's, to me, what makes us think that Iran's going to agree to whatever. And that is worth addressing sort of a question we ought to address as we move forward. Liking this video so far? Don't just be a watcher. Go ahead and hit the like, share, and subscribe button. And don't forget to tap the bell so you will not miss any of my videos or live streams. This way, you will be supporting a channel that stands for the truth and objective reporting. The choice is yours. Thanks for your support. And what I meant by that is 2 options or 3 options. I'm going to state the arguments on both sides. I'll let you decide. As always, that's how we do it in this channel here. Will Iran cave in? I'm going to ask the question. I know some will say, well, Dr. O, there is no way. It's beside the point. We have to address the possibilities. When you do an assessment, when you do an analysis, you can't just look into one angle. You have to have a variety of sort of perspectives to have a much clearer picture. So I'm going to start with the first question. Will Iran cave in? So here is the thing. Why Iran may partially yield or cave in. There's one thing first that comes to mind is the economic desperation or the economic pressure, because it's real. So, Tehran is really in a delicate position to get the damaging US economic sanctions eased up. Because Iran's economy has been battered for years by maximum pressures. And I know almost 40 years, and Iran's still standing. But at the same time, we're going to have to address what's factual. And the population inside Iran, not everybody is okay with the economic conditions as they are. And this, when you think about these conditions, it gives Trump enormous leverage. So the Iranian leadership knows a deal is only a path back to economic normalcy. That means they have to cut a deal. That's just one option. The military reality has fundamentally shifted as part of why Iran might consider partial agreement or so. And this is the most critical factor, in my opinion. Because remember, on the eve of Israel's war against Iran last June, Iranian officials, and I have it on a record, Iranian officials assessed that Israel will not strike before the 6th round of negotiations concluded. They were off. Instead, what happened? Iran's capital, Tehran, awoke before dawn to coordinated strikes and internal drone operation that eliminated much of the country's senior military leadership. And that is why Iran was caught completely off guard once before and knows that Trump will strike again. And again, I'm just providing you the possible thinking that might be going on inside the Iranian administration. The other consideration will also be that the talks in Geneva are progressing genuinely. And that's what, again, what Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated. We were, and I quote, we were able to reach a general agreement on a number of guiding principles, and from now on, we will proceed on the basis of those principles and move forward towards drafting the text of a potential agreement, end of quote.
Trying to predict the future is a hazardous occupation. The only thing we can be sure of is that it will be absolutely fantastic. I'm thinking of the incredible breakthrough, the communications satellite.
For this one, I'm shaking my head. Once again, using history as my guide, it's exact process we went through in 2015, nuclear agreement with Iran. Everything, the text was provided to the P5+1. Everybody agreed on it. It was signed. Everything was good to go. Some of the sanctions were lifted. Donald Trump pulled the US unilaterally. And as a matter of fact, it's been reported inside Iran that Iran has now agreed to submit a written proposal addressing Washington's concern, which in my opinion, it's a significant diplomatic steps. This is if we go with that argument, the first one. The other argument is that, or the other question, why will Iran will not fully cave in? And this one is very important because here it's where it gets very dangerous. Iran has red lines, it appears, unwilling to cross regardless of the consequences. Iran insists its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. We all know this and move forward with that. But it says it is willing to discuss limits only in exchange for sanctions relief. Yeah, once again, you're going to open that door. It will never, the US and the West will never, mainly the US, because the West, Europe, it's useless anyway. The US and Israel, that's the one pushing the US for all this. We'll never stop. We'll never stop till two conditions are met. So the missile capabilities are destroyed completely, and all the enriched uranium that is already pure enriched uranium be taken out of the country, out of Iran. It's already been suggested that it needs to be exported to Turkey, be stored in Turkey. Well, guess what we have in Turkey? We have Incirlik base. That's where we have our nuclear bombers and all that stuff. And at the same time, Iran has rejected the zero uranium enrichment and rule out the talks on its missile capabilities entirely. Because to Iran, that's the wild card they have. If they get rid of their missiles, it's over for Iran. Why will they ever do that? No one in a right mind will agree to something like this. No way. No way. And that's why I don't understand the arguments of why they are pushing, they meaning US and Israel, for, well, we have to sort of remove all Iran's missiles. No, it's not. No, that's the wild card they have. That's why it doesn't make any sense. Now, there are those who argue because if Iran does that, it will leave it defenseless. For now, they have something. The US knows it, and they are concerned about it. There is one other point that I was thinking about, and it just, again, we're just thinking outside the box here, which in my opinion, if it is the case, that then it will be the most alarming factor. And that is if Iran may be misreading the situation. And again, I'm just thinking out loud here. That's the most concern to me. It will be that if Iranian decision makers continue to interpret mounting US military deployment as a pressure design, that pressure is designed for one specific, to force negotiations rather than preparation for escalation, that's a problem. That's misguided thinking. So the dominant belief remains that Washington ultimately seeks a nuclear agreement and wants to avoid a prolonged regional war. I had to share this with you. In another word, Iran thinks this is all about negotiating tactics, just like before. But the geopolitical environment surrounding Iran has transformed. Remember what's going on in Syria. Syria has fallen out of Iran's strategic equation. Hezbollah and Hamas lost much of their some capabilities, not all, during the 23-24 war with Israel. I'm not going to go as far as saying, like some other analysts, which I disagree with, that Iran is far weaker today than it was a few years. No, I won't go that far. Because still, Iran can surprise you. We don't know. We don't know. And that is, again, where you have to think to yourself, Iran will likely offer enough to keep the talks alive. That's the way I see it. Partial concessions, maybe. A written proposal, maybe. Another round of negotiations, maybe. But it's unlikely to meet all of Trump's core demand, particularly on missile technologies. So within, and of course, Mr. Trump wants this within the next 10 or 15 days window. So the real danger, in my opinion, with all this, is the gap between what Trump demands and what Iran can politically offer. That's the way I see it. Otherwise, we're looking at a full-blown war. And also whether within this gap triggers military action before diplomacy has truly been exhausted. Because no one wants an increase of tensions in the region. Because everyone understands that they're playing with fire. And this is, again, where the next 10, 15 days may be among the most consequential of this decade, believe it or not. And I am not left without wondering about one other aspect, and I'll close with this. What if Iran surprises the US with some advanced weaponry? Yeah, what if? Iran's not going to show all its cards. It's common sense. They're going to play all that. No, they won't. But what if they end up surprising the US? And first thing that comes to mind is the hypersonic arsenal. Of course, some will say, some Western military analysts will say, oh, that's just overhyped. No. I think they're real. Those are considered the most advanced missiles for Iran, especially the Fatah 1 or Fatah 1, because that one, it deserves scrutiny on part of the US military because they have to consider the consequences of that. Of course, Iran describes it as a hypersonic. Some independent analysts are saying, and those are within part of the, and I looked into their analysis, read some of it, part of the International Institute for Strategic Studies. They characterized it as a medium-range ballistic missile with maneuverable re-entry vehicle and not truly hypersonic. I don't buy that argument they're saying. I won't buy that because they won't want to admit it. Because they are saying, oh, it's not truly a hypersonic glide vehicle in the same class as the Russians or the Chinese systems. Well, after all, this technology was transferred by two countries, to my knowledge, North Korea and Russia. So, yeah, some will say, well, maybe they are near hypersonic or quasi-hypersonic. It won't matter. It won't matter. The fact that it exists, that is where it's still a serious threat in practical terms. You have to think in those terms, and in extreme speed. Because when you think about this type of hypersonic, over 5 times the speed of sound, combined with the mid-flight maneuverability, makes it far harder to track and intercept. Even for advanced systems like the Israeli Arrow missile defense systems, they won't be able to do it. So, of course, Iran has already used these types of weapons. Because in April 24, it launched roughly between 110 and 130 ballistic missiles at Israel. Some say nearly half of them were intercepted. Some other data said that were about 90%. Others saying only about 7 or 9 missiles get through. And that's all you need, 1 or 2 to get through to a specific target. And in this case, we're talking about the US aircraft carrier. Then the other aspect will have to do with the anti-radar surprise cards. Perhaps that's the most genuinely alarming capability Iran could deploy that is less discussed, by the way. This is why Iran's Hormuz anti-radar ballistic missiles is home in radar emissions and attack the signal source itself. This is why the Iranians launched those 5 missiles at specific targets in a Strait of Hormuz. And they hit the target, by the way. And that's where the Russian connection comes in. Because the Russians provided this type of radars. They provided the jamming systems for radars. And this is, again, you're going to see the readings or the analysis from the Western think tanks, military institutions, and so forth, as saying, oh, there is no hypersonic or Iran didn't develop the hypersonic capabilities. Others would say, yeah, they developed some, but not on its own. Well, who cares? As long as they have it. Because one thing for sure that I am certain of is that the Russian technical assistance is involved in this capability.
Terry Leo Wilson wants you to forget what she did in Austin. While Texas families buried soldiers killed by radical Islamic terrorists, Wilson celebrated their beliefs, her vote, her record, her betrayal. See for yourself. That's how radical Islam spread. Austin politicians like Terry Leo Wilson let it happen. Don't let her get away with it. Terry Leo Wilson, too radical for Texas.
Russia did it quietly, transferred some advanced missile technology during deepening partnership, which, by the way, Iran never disclosed that publicly or revealed it. And that's, to me, where it will represent a genuine strategic surprise for the Americans. And that's the way I see it. It is what I'm going to conclude with. I conclude with another aspect that maybe Trump didn't even think about, something else. And this one is, like I said earlier, maybe Iran misread certain things. What Trump also may have misread Iran's position and why Tehran is likely to calculate that capitulating to Trump's deal is riskier than a military confrontation with the United States. What do you think? So make sure to leave me some comments in the comment section. I would really like to read your feedback about this question. Not a question, but this statement. In your opinion, sort of, if we think that Donald Trump misread Iran's position and why Tehran is likely to calculate that capitulating to Mr. Trump's deal is far riskier than a military confrontation with the United States. So, as I said again, I would really like to read your feedback on this. I thank Hangin G for sharing some of the comments on this one. Truly appreciate you for that, and all of you guys. I truly read your stuff. I take this opportunity, by the way, to say Happy Ramadan to those who observe the fasting. I'm sorry I missed it last time we did the live stream on the first day of Ramadan. I forgot, but I just want to wish my followers, those who observe Ramadan, I want to wish you a happy Ramadan. And also take this opportunity to say thank you to FU for your super sticker in support, your donation, I'm sorry, not super sticker, your donation in support of my upcoming Asia trip. I'm very, very grateful to you for that. And I'll take this opportunity to say thank you to a flying boer. Get rid of precision. The guy is weak. Thank you, first of all, for your super sticker. And you know what? Your statements, I've heard it from some people inside Iran. They are really, really wondering about Brzezinski not being this firm, strong president they were hoping for. So I can see your point on this one. I appreciate you all for your support for the channel. Please share this video with others and subscribe if you have not done so. And I look forward to seeing you next time. As always, remember, geopolitics impact your daily life in more ways than one. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Here, the real politic, and you can see Mark on his boosty.to. You can write on the left side, on the right side of Mark, you can see his boosty, that is boosty.to/the real politic. And you can follow Mark on that and subscribe to, and I think you can, you can find a lot of stuff different from what you usually hear in the mainstream media. That's the whole purpose of this sort of podcast that we do here on Dialogue Works. Mark, let me start with what's going on in the Middle East, in the West Asia. The Trump administration has brought a lot of weapons close to Iran, ready to attack Iran. And on the part of Iranians, they're trying to negotiate at the same time, negotiating with the United States, but at the same time, they say that they're not going to negotiate on the ballistic missile program, nor they're not going to negotiate about the help, the support to the acts of resistance. And the latest news from Iran is that the Iranian president stated that the Iranian leadership has decided not to bow to external pressure, no matter how strong it may be. The IRGC and the army are actively preparing to repel aggression and take countermeasures which will affect a large part of the Middle East region. How do you see the whole scene? Do you see that a big war is coming between the United States and Iran largely, or is it you see something different?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to see it in any other way. I think, quite obviously, there are many people within the Trump regime whom this is what they've been working towards all along. As for Donald Trump and at least a handful, I think they've probably scratching their heads and wondering how the hell they got here and not sure that this is where they want to be, but there's too much impetus. There's too much domestic political pressure. There's too much driving things forward at this point. You don't move 2 aircraft carrier battle groups and hundreds of fighter aircraft over. Last count I saw was 87 refueling tankers for aircraft. There's a huge amount of strike power that has been assembled, and that's expensive. And we also, by the way, see in this deployment not only the strength of the U.S. military, but we see its weakness, because we see that it is strained, right? We're talking serious military effects of imperial overstretch that is stretching the U.S. Navy thin. So the Abraham Lincoln was the principal aircraft carrier in theater, but quite obviously that wasn't going to be enough for serious attacks on Iran. So there was a decision. We're not quite sure. There's contradictory messages whether it was to bring in another aircraft carrier group or 2 more aircraft carrier groups. And originally they wanted to bring in the George W. Bush. But evidently there were problems. That it had just finished the deployment. It was undergoing various types of repairs. I've heard all different kinds of rumors about damages to the sanitation system. Who knows? We don't know for sure what it was, but it wasn't seaworthy. That's the most important thing. So then they had to pull the Gerald Ford out of where it was playing babysitting duty over Venezuela and Cuba for the fleet that was assembled there to exert U.S. dominance over the Western Hemisphere. That had to be brought out and rushed. It's still on its way across the Med as we're taping now, to be brought into the theater. So this was not something that they were fully prepared for, at least at the military level. Maybe at the political level, they weren't stressing, to the military their long-term requirements. But we also know that from the Trump regime's own national security strategy and its national defense strategy, which came out just over a month ago, that is supposed to translate that into policy. The professed aim on paper of the Trump regime was to get out of the Middle East, to not be dragged into down in the Middle East, but to finally begin the long heralded pivot to Asia, to confront what the U.S. sees as its real peer adversary, China. Now, every U.S. president has been saying that since Obama. And every U.S. president since Obama gets bogged down in the Middle East. Every single one of them. And of course, yes, Iran has and has always been a big part of that, because Iran's not going away. There are certainly some people, definitely within the Netanyahu regime in Israel, and some their, shall we say, best advocates within the United States, right? Whether we're talking Lindsey Graham or other figures within the administration who are real big pro-Israel hawks, for Christian Zionists, whatever you want to call them. They see this as their best and maybe last opportunity to drag the U.S. into a war. Now, the U.S. itself is not being dragged into a war, right? The U.S. doesn't get dragged into wars, right? The U.S. wades into wars, fists flaying and everything. But certainly, there are different veins of thought. There are different factions, of course, even within any given regime in the United States. And that's true of the Trump regime as it is with any. I have no doubt that there are people within the Trump regime that don't want war with Iran. And I know that there are some that want it very much. And obviously they've got the head. And Trump, whatever he may have claimed or thought, whatever was put into this national defense strategy and national security strategy by Elbridge Colby at the Pentagon, the Undersecretary of Defense for Planning and Policy. They're here, and there's no way for them to back down now. Now, certainly, Netanyahu and his advocates in the U.S. feel that they will never have a U.S. president whom is this both predisposed towards Israel and this weak, that he is able to be manipulated in the way that he is, right, into doing what they want, particularly with regards to Israel. We can talk about his donors, status, all of that, but it's also at a personal level. All of his previous, his own officials in his previous administration, bragged and laughed about manipulating Trump into doing what they wanted. And it's not such a victim thing. That's the way Trump runs his ship, such as it is, right? He wants to be the God Emperor of mankind, that people come to his court and pay him court and flatter him and try to convince him and play to his narcissism. And that's the way he wants it. So, I mean, it's not like he's being manipulated. It's not like the good czar manipulated by bad boyars, right? To use a Russianism. It's a bad czar and bad boyars, right? That's what the situation is. But also, I think there's a closing window of military opportunity as well. It's quite obvious now that I mean, to anyone who's been paying any attention, even reading the New York Times or the Washington Post, that there's an acknowledgement that Iran has a quite significant retaliatory long-range strike capability, whether we're talking ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, possibly hypersonic missiles, right, and long-range drones. There's no question about that, and they have formidable. They don't have a blue water navy or anything, but in terms of anti-ship missiles and small coastal boats with missile capabilities and so forth, they have a fairly credible naval coastal defense force, right? Capable, I think, of inflicting an asymmetric amount of damage for their size. And that capabilities are growing. They're not getting smaller. That long range strike capability, I think, really, for lack of a better, put the fear of God in them last June. I think they severely underestimated it. But even more than that, there are now finally, because it didn't happen before last June, but I think there's enough signals that Iran has started to accept help military-wise or military prep-wise from Russia and China. And that means that within a fairly short period of time, right, as such things go, within 5 years, Iran could be looking at a very formidable air and missile defense and electronic warfare shield as well, right? If Russia is heavily involved in this, we've seen that they have the most effective in the world, whatever they may claim about David's boomerang and the proven junk that they are Patriot system, in comparison to Russian air defense. So if that Russia has the time to build, they haven't had that time now, right? They have to build up the network. They have to train Iranian people to use this. Takes several years, of course. They haven't had that time yet, but there's a closing window of opportunity military-wise. Until that will be much more difficult. And then, of course, you have the domestic schedule in the United States, right? Trump is rolling into midterm elections. If he loses midterm elections, he's going to be battling Congress, facing impeachments, almost certainly, and he's going to be consumed by that. He may already be consumed at this moment going forward with battles with the Supreme Court over tariffs, right? There's a lot that is going to be heaped on his plate, and he may not have the attention and bandwidth for major foreign policy adventures like this, if that's what you want to call it, going in. So I think that we're really looking, I think the people who want this are looking at their watch and looking at a countdown and knowing they don't have a lot of time. So I think there's actually some urgency behind those powers within both the Trump and the Netanyahu regime who really want this, to pushing this now. Because it may not be possible like this again. And I don't think their options are that great now, right? And we've talked about this before. I've talked about it on many other channels. But it has recently been confirmed in the pages of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and everywhere. The U.S. Achilles heel is air and missile defense. And not only in the capability of their systems, and that's primarily the Patriot and the THAAD, which are kind of long in the tooth. They're old systems. They're not able to handle a lot of modern missile and drone challenges. But even more than capability is their very low industrial production rate of interceptors for the Patriot, and even more so, a very even slower production for the THAAD. And they have not been able to ramp up that production in the last 4 years of the conflict in Ukraine. They were already running short, even before the conflict in Ukraine, from Saudi expenditures in their invasion of Yemen. That was reported in the Western press at the time, that Saudi actually had to work out a deal brokered by the U.S. to transfer Patriot interceptors from other Gulf state countries to Saudi with promises they would get them back later, because there was already a shortage then. And there was a huge expenditure for Ukraine, of course, right? All up in smoke now. And there was some air defense assets wasted while the Trump first the Blinken-Sullivan administration, then the Trump administration was trying to play whack-a-mole against the Houthis in Yemen, not very effectively, with more wastes there. And then, of course, last June, huge expenditure of air defense assets, and Iran was exhausting the supply of interceptors for both Israeli air and missile defense and U.S. air and missile defense and all of the allies, that work with that. And there has been not a year. And we know that a lot of the we know that Raytheon makes probably less than just under 650 air defense interceptors a year for the PAC-3, right? For the Patriot. And that's nothing. That's nothing, especially when it's standard practice to fire at least 2 interceptors at any ballistic target that even have a chance of being able to bring it down, right? And for instance, in Ukraine, the Russians are sometimes firing dozens of Iskanders on top of hypersonic missiles and cruise missiles at a single salvo, right? Several times a week, right? So you see, obviously, they can't supply Ukraine, much less their own military needs, plus less defend Israel. And Iran is certainly capable of firing hundreds, maybe over 1,000 such missiles of various ranges and capabilities at Israel and at U.S. military bases in the region. So what do you use? You don't have the air defense. That had not had a chance to restock that. And there was a report out in Responsible Statecraft highlighting that even of the low production of interceptors that we're at, some of that is still tithed towards long-range contracts on a monthly basis going automatically to Ukraine. So even of that 650, that's not all sitting there for use in against Iran. That is being doled out to Ukraine and other countries and everything. So I was actually shocked when they launched the June Israeli attacks backed by the U.S. last year, because I was like, they don't have enough air defense missiles. What are they thinking? And they thought they were going to get this decapitation strike with Mossad and the CIA on the ground, right? These assassinations, all of this other stuff. And they thought that was going to take out the regime. And then it would just be, cleaning up the mess. Of course, it didn't work out that way. Their decapitation strike was only marginally successful. And that very quickly, Iranian air defense, such as it is, started to operate a bit better. And then the long retaliatory strikes began and quickly exhausted Israeli and U.S. air defense capacity. And that's why at the end, right, what happened is it started to turn into a long-range strike war of attrition that was tending in Iran's favor. And so the U.S. had to come in and pull Israel's ass out of the fire, drop some bombs through a prearranged deal with Iran, declare victory, and demand a ceasefire. Here, just months later, right? Not even a year later, we're back again. And again, the U.S. and Israel are presented. If they can't immediately take out the Iranian government, again, they're talking openly on the pages of the New York Times, assassinations, decapitation strike, right? Their CIA and Mossad insurgency that they launched already failed, was quickly ground out, supposedly with the help of Russian electronic warfare, helping block Starlink and track down the terminals, at least according to Forbes. They'll be back in the same place unless they've got some magic card up their sleeves to take out the Iranian government quickly and completely, either the government or some magical seed campaign that can wipe out all of Iran's mobile missile launchers all over the country in a few days. If they can't do that, and I don't think that they can, could be wrong, but I don't think that they can. They can do damage. I mean, no one doubts that. No one doubts that Iran is going to suffer huge damage. The question is, can they survive? Right? This is the power imbalance between the US and Iran is the same type of power imbalance dictating, what are the terms for victory between Israel and Hamas or Hezbollah, such that Iran wins if the government survives. That's it, right? The U.S. has openly said regime change. Trump said openly that's the best outcome, right? I mean, there's no question that that's what they're working for. There's no question that this is nothing about nuclear enrichment. This is nothing about any fictional nuclear program. Even if you tossed in the ballistic missile programs and made Iran completely vulnerable to an Israel that has attacked them multiple times over the last few years, something that no sane country, with an ounce of sovereignty and independence would or could do. And, this thing about the Shiite groups that they support across the Middle East, it's just absurd. I mean, the U.S. is the only country allowed to arm and use proxies around the world. Come on. No. Iran can't accept those terms. So the U.S. sent out those terms knowing that they're impossible for Iran to meet, and that every side is going through the motion while forces on both sides are being assembled, right? I'm sure most of your audience out there, like me, is seeing all kinds of social media, Telegram, Twitter X, of cargo planes going back and forth between Russia and Tehran, China and Tehran, even Minsk and Tehran, all over. We don't know what is being, we don't know. We don't. We can speculate a lot, but we're not going to be told that, at least not until it's all over, and maybe not then. But we can presume that at the very least, Russia and China both are going to be supplying Iran with major C4 ISR, major satellite information. China's already making public the locations of lots of, public photos with lots of locations of U.S. air defense that they've hastily assembled at their bases across the Middle East and in Israel and so forth. And that alone will be a huge aid to Iran in striking back. But it's probably something more than that. So what are the U.S. options? If they can't take out the Iranian government like that with a decapitation strike, some magic discombobulator ray or whatever Trump is on about, or some CIA Mossad magic, then we're right back where we were last June. And that would mean in these terms Iranian victory, right? Because they will win a long-range strike of attrition campaign. Again, because of the U.S.-Israeli relative weakness in terms of air and missile defense capacity. Now, if the Trump administration has a moment of sanity and decides that their options that the Pentagon presents aren't good, Trump wanted a quick and dirty victory. It's obvious now that he's not going to get that. Then we will suddenly hear the U.S. talking about the nuclear program and nothing else. And there will be some type of enrichment agreement, maybe Russia, transferring nuclear to Russia, or Russia stepping in as some type of inspection role, or Iran agreeing to some 1.5% enrichment, something like that. But that will only be if the Trump administration is backing down and is looking for a face-saving, PR spin of walking away from this. And I don't know, I haven't heard anyone that actually thinks that that's where things are going. It's not impossible, right? So we have to say that. If we start hearing that, that's what we know it is. As the Trump administration realizes they don't have good military options, and they're, for at least the time being, trying to walk away from it. No sign of that so far that I have seen or that I've heard anyone reporting on. So
Nathan Watkins doesn't believe limits, especially limits on your property taxes. Watkins testified.
The end of this week, certainly the Gerald Ford will be in theater, at least off the coast of Israel, able to provide some additional air defense capability to Israel there. And that's when we can really look. We've heard various comments that it could start this weekend, right? We could get off this podcast and find out that it's begun, or it could begin sometime this night. We don't know that. I think it's likely not to happen for a few more days, because this would be such a big, they will want to have as many assets as they can reasonably have in theater. So I think most likely we've got another 5 days to a week. But Trump said that, and Trump said that last time, and then that was used as a, that talks were still going on as a lure to bring down the Iranians' guard, and Israel launched their sneak attack. The Iranians, of course, are not going to be caught, asleep at the wheel again in this situation. Plus, there are Russian and Chinese ships in the area. Not a lot of them, right? It must be said there's one Russian corvette there, as far as I know, the Strikey. And China has a few ships that were there for already scheduled annual Russia-Iranian-Chinese naval drills in the Gulf of Oman, or off the coast of Oman, I should say. But those certainly have additional intelligence capabilities, and they will be monitoring what the U.S. is doing, which pretty much guarantees, I think, that there cannot, that and other satellite information, those ships are not going to engage in defense of Iran directly. Everyone should not have those expectations. That's not what's going to happen. We're not going to see Chinese troops in Tehran, right? It's not going to be that thing anyway, right? The U.S. does not have an invasion force. No one is even talking about that. Certainly not at this stage. Now what I am hearing is lots of rumors about the U.S. preparing to activate various separatist groups. And what we're talking about there, of course, is our best buddies in the Mujahideen Khalq, those crazy motherfuckers that were previously listed as terrorists by the United States until they were deemed to be geopolitically useful, a lot like the Kosovo Liberation Army in Kosovo and Serbia. But they will certainly be deployed if it's if they're really looking for regime change. Baluchi and possibly ethnic Azerbaijani separatist groups. And I've even heard about Kurds being activated by the United States, which is another possibility. And of course, here we're talking about Iranian Kurds. It's always important to remember when talking about the Kurds is there's no united Kurdish nation. There's different Kurdish groups in every country in the area, all usually operating against each other at some level, right? And all with their own interests and so forth. But I mean, if the Iranian Kurds get dragged into this, after seeing the U.S. throw first the Iraqi Kurds under the bus and then the Syrian Kurds under the bus, I mean, I don't know what to say. That, there's something to be said about the cognitive ability of the Kurdish nation as a whole if they allow themselves to be dragged into that proxy role again. That is what could happen on the ground. And those would only have any chance of success if there was huge success with a decapitation strike at political and military targets and a sustained air campaign, which I'm not sure the U.S. is really capable of. Not only is the U.S. short on air defense missiles, they're also relatively short on long-range strike missiles, right? Tomahawks, others. How do we know that? Because the front pages of the Western media told us that a few months ago, right? When the Trump ordered the Pentagon ordered the military-industrial complex to ramp up the production of 10 different missile categories, right? Air defense and long-range strike. Why? Because they were short, right? And again, we haven't had that opportunity to restock those in just the months since then. So there's also a question of how much offensive capability they really have if they want to maintain. Of course, they want standoff strikes. They don't want to enter into Iranian airspace. There's too much danger there. Their carriers don't want to get too close to Iran because Iran does have the capability to send them fathoms down. And they're going to want to, stay out as much as possible out of range. But when we're talking about Iran, I mean, let's be perfectly clear here. Iran is not Venezuela. We're not looking at anything that looks like that. This will be a real war, almost certain, right? This is not going to be some CIA op where the Iranian government turns over Khomeini to the U.S. and then pretends like they didn't, right? We're not going to see that type of Delcy Rodriguez quizzling bullshit in Iran. That's not here. Yeah, I mean, there's a certain percentage of the Iranian population that is unhappy with the Iranian government. I'm an American or originally an American who was unhappy with the U.S. government. I mean, that happens. But yeah, maybe 30, maybe 35%. But regardless, there's a clear majority that does support the Iranian government, and continual attempts to pretend that is not true by the Iranian expert community in the U.S. and the rest of the West is just them drinking their own Kool-Aid, right? Because they want war, they want, hegemonic operations and the like. They're not experts, they're ideologues, they're anti-Iranian ideologues. And we see the U.S. experts do that with Russia, they do that with China, and so forth. And I mean, I was extremely skeptical about the Venezuelan government's ability to resist the U.S. going into what happened there. I saw that one coming a mile away. I know there's still some people out there that want to pretend what happened didn't really happen, right? They don't want to believe it. I certainly didn't like it. I don't like being a Cassandra and calling that, but I think there were very good reasons to question the Venezuelan government's ability to resist the U.S. That is not the case here. That is not the case. I do not see that at all. I'm not saying that Iran will come out of this unscathed. No one should have any illusions that the U.S. does have incredible destructive power available to them, and that the very worst is always whatever dirty games the CIA and Mossad have cooked up. I think that those are always a bigger threat than even long range strikes. Cruise tomahawks, missile strikes, stealth bomber, whatever. But I don't know what they have left up the sleeve, because I think they already would have blown their load last June or most recent with these last ones. And I would guess that the CIA and Mossad do not have some magic plan. But we'll find out. I mean, that is what we'll find out. But I will tell everyone, pay more attention to what is happening in that covert sphere than even what is happening in the long range strike sphere, because last June Mossad did more damage on the ground than all of the Israeli long range strikes out of Iraqi airspace did to Iran.
All right, look, I don't know who needs to hear this, but my man just tried that new 100 milligram generic Viagra.
I think, Mark, we can somehow say, from what I've seen in Iran, I was there for 40 days. I think they have cleaned up a lot of mess in Iran, because they know the threat of that sort of covert operations that you just mentioned. And I think one of the main points that you've made is so much important, that is the United States has never experienced, I would say, in the aftermath of the World War II, or maybe Vietnam. In Vietnam, they didn't fight a war, a big war, a real war.
This is an opponent that they have not faced since World War II. Iran is not a near peer competitor to the United States in military on paper, but between what the U.S. is capable of putting into that theater, because they have global hegemonic commitments, that is a different story. There, the U.S. capabilities are limited in what they are capable of hitting Iran with, and it's a very long way from the United States. I don't care how many military bases they have in the region. I don't care CENTCOM and whatever. It's still a strain. It's still a stretch. And Iran has far more capability today than Iraq ever had, or Vietnam ever had, or Korea, going back to the 50s. It's not Russia, right? But I mean, if we're looking at the scale of countries, the U.S., it's just below that. There's not much else there. I mean, North Korea, maybe. I mean, that's where we're looking at. So this is a serious fight, and everything that I have seen from very heavy U.S. involvement in the conflict in Ukraine, and of the war games that NATO has been running recently against drone operations and the like. They just ran this. They actually ran it last May, but we heard the news about this NATO Operation Hedgehog war games, where they had a number of Ukrainians step in and play the role of the Russians. And we saw a handful, basically, 10 Ukrainian drone operators take out dozens of NATO military vehicles and effectively immobilize 2 NATO battalions worth of troops, right? Just a handful. That should tell no one. I mean, of course, that is land-centric, right? That is still, not what we're going to be dealing with here. But Iran is very practiced in using drones and all types of long-range strike capabilities. I would be very surprised if they're not rolling out unmanned boats water drones, right, as well, USVs. I'm absolutely certain that we'll see those deployed as well against anything from the U.S. naval-wise that gets anything close. And then, of course, we always have Iran's nuclear option. They just practiced exercises in the Strait of Hormuz, closing the Strait of Hormuz, flood it with sea mines. That's it. That's something the U.S. going into midterm elections, and Americans, Americans are what they are, right? And you Americans out there watching this, you know that you care about foreign policy, whereas the vast majority of your countrymen otherwise don't. They don't vote on foreign policy. They never have. I don't care. But they will vote on the price at the pump, and the oil price is already going through the roof. And from a cold-blooded realpolitik position, seeing here in Russia, and seeing the U.S. ratchet up all these tensions and getting ready to probably launch what will almost certainly be an inconclusive major military campaign against Iran, what I see from Russia's geopolitical position is the price of oil skyrocketing as a result, meaning our finances are going to be great for the special military operation for the next year or so. And it also means that the U.S. is wasting all of these military assets. And, we're in the driver's seat. I mean, we're already in the driver's seat for Ukraine endgame, but now even more, freedom of operation there. And the Chinese are saying, that's it. We don't even have to worry about some type of Taiwan or South Sea China. If the U.S. goes seriously here, they're going to be wasting so many assets that they don't have to spare, and they do not have the military industrial complex capability at the moment to ramp up. Then they're going to have years, right, of time of closed window of opportunity to confront China militarily, where they will continue to build up their military all during that time period. And then I already think the idea of fighting China off China's coast is a fantasy for the United States. Then it won't even be a question. You won't even be able to fantasize about it. So the U.S. could they could go terribly geopolitically wrong here. And that's even if they did have some success.
We desperately need your support to save this house of Allah. Your donation will help install new prayer cards.
They would still be wasting a huge amount of military assets, and it's very likely, with their history of even successful geopolitical adventures. I mean, just take a look at Iraq. Did Iraq work out in the U.S. Geopolitical favor, right? Getting rid of Saddam Hussein, making Iraq by population a tacit ally of Iran. I mean, because Shia majority. I mean, there's all kinds of things. If there's anyone in the United States who seriously thinks they're going to put that Muppet Shaw into Iran, I got another. I mean, at least in Venezuela, when it came down to it, there was no talk of sending that Machado woman. I mean, and Trump's like, she has no support in the country. That was all just psyop. There's nothing really there, right? But we got Delcy Rodriguez turned, and she's a Quisling, and that works good for us. And so I don't think they're going to find that in Iran. I don't think that Iran is that vulnerable to that type of co-option.
Mark, but the same logic, the same cold-blooded logic that you've just mentioned, your analysis would suggest that, let's assume that's the calculation, part of the calculation on the part of Russian and Chinese, but the whole objective is going to be to let the war going on and on, not anybody. That's why the United States would be trapped in the Middle East. That's going to bring huge problems to the.
Let's be clear. Russia and China's first priority is for the existing government in Iran to survive, right? It's an ally. They could not see it replaced. They're finally on better terms with that government than they have been, at least since since Iran had a real president, as far as I'm concerned. Once the conflict has begun, they're going to be doing more and more to help the Iranian government, not necessarily out of a sense of dragging out the conflict, but of helping Iran at an existential level, the Iranian government survive, right? I'm not saying that Russia and China are in any way want or encourage this. I'm simply talking, what are the geopolitical consequences that they're both going to be factoring in, looking at simulations of where everything is going to go with this? There's very much difference there, in what it is. Russia and China have a vested interest in not seeing the U.S. overthrow the Iranian government, and that will be their first and foremost priority. And in that sense, they won't want to drag it on for any longer than it has to be, because then there's always a possibility, however remote, that could happen. That said, they're also not going to go to World War III with the United States over Iran. That is not in their national interests. If it becomes that the Iranian government looks like it's about to fall, well, I believe that at that point, the U.S. will have expended so many resources and be putting themselves in such a bad diplomatic position with regards to the rest of Eurasia, that Russia and China will be able to deal with the consequences of that, unfortunate. But I don't think we're going to. That is not, I think, a likely possibility out of all of this. I think the most likely is an inconclusive results, where the U.S. does incredible damage to Iran, where Iran does significant damage back to Israel, certainly, possibly to U.S. military bases. The Iranian government loses some people, but their way of life, their government continues. The U.S. will doubtless declare victory, because that's, they have to. It's PR and narrative are more important than anything else to them. But again, if the Iranian government survives, they win. That's all that matters at this point. It's an existential struggle. The Iranians want to survive. The U.S. and Israel want regime change.
I haven't been to the grocery store in over a year, but I'm eating healthier than ever. Here's how I did it. Meal planning used to be such a nice.
Mark, what is your assessment on the countries in the region, in the West Asia? I'm talking about going from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, going to Turkey. We know that the Israelis somehow are feeling that the worst enemy is becoming the new Iran is Turkey. As they talk, Naftali Bennett said that Turkey is the new Iran. But they're not happy with Saudi Arabia as well. Because UAE is somehow helping them the way that no one else is doing that for them in the Middle East. That's why I think they're comparing Saudi Arabia to UAE. Who's the friend? Of course, UAE. They see the tensions in Syria. They feel that maybe this is a confrontation between the Ottoman Empire and the empire that Israel wants to build. How do you see the whole situation in the Middle East, in the West Asia?
Okay, I think any rhetoric back and forth between Turkey and Israel is just that. Turkey has never done anything against Israel. I'm sure you've seen all these little meme clips and whatever online that show two dogs barking ferociously against each other with some kind of barrier in between them, and then they pull up the barrier and they both go and walk off. That's Turkey and Israel. I mean, Turkey is still a member of NATO. However, independent, cunning beast foreign policy. I think that Erdogan has never done anything actually against Israel, and I don't expect that to change in the future. He has his domestic politics. His domestic base are Islamists, right? Sunni Islamists, right? Islam Justice Party, right? That's he is always going to play that card. But I look at actions, not rhetoric, and Turkey has never done anything. So they can snipe at each other all they want until I actually see something change. I consider Turkey a non-factor. In fact, relations between Turkey and Iran have gotten so bad as a result of what happened, Turkey helping, to a large extent, putting Al-Qaeda in power in Syria, and also Turkish collaboration with Azerbaijan, and that threat to Iran, that relations between Iran and Turkey have soured very badly over the last few years. And I would not be at all surprised if Turkey very quietly greenlights the U.S. use of U.S. bases in Turkey for operations against Iran. That would not surprise me. Against Israel, I don't consider them. Now, Saudi is more interesting and more complicated. Saudi, first of all, let's be perfectly clear, Saudi is not a member of the Axis of Resistance, if anyone had any illusions. And Saudi isn't even a member of BRICS. Not really. Kind of put a foot in the water, offered, not accepted, but not denied. They're playing this both sides of the fence game. That's okay. I'm a realist, right? I'm a cynic as well as a realist, and I understand that. I actually see that whatever I may, and I did not have very good opinion of Mohammed bin Bonsa a few years ago. I think he has seriously, under some fire, matured as a statesman, either him or his foreign policy team, whatever you want to call that. And they've shown, I think, increasing amount of maturity. And the rapprochement and partial normalizations of relations between Iran and Saudi, with Chinese and Omani help and so forth, is a sign of that maturity. And his very effective ongoing cooperation with Russia in OPEC Plus, I think it's all to a credit. I mean, again, looking at Saudi Arabia from a realist, national interest orientated perspective, they have made clear that they think this is a mistake, that they're very afraid of what might happen in the Strait of Hormuz. And I think at this point, they're not even sure that they really want the U.S. to overthrow the Iranian government. Sometimes better the devil right? Especially when you're able to sit down and have a talk with that devil now, right? So I think that they are not behind this. They're also increasingly having reservations about Israel. They're afraid, I think, of what in Israel, without at least the potential of threat from Iran and Iran-backed groups. I think Saudi is saying that we're okay with the status quo as it is now. We're not sure we want a major shakeup, especially after just what had just happened in Syria. We're not even sure that that is where that is right now. I think Saudi wants to sit this one out. They're not going to go to war with Israel, right? But they have said at least that they're not going to allow their airspace to be used for attacks against Iran. Now, I'm also skeptical about that. The U.S. is capable of applying all kinds of pressure and carrots and sticks and so forth. But even if they do, it's clear enough to me that this is not something that they want, or at least they're not sure that this is what they want. So they're not enthusiastic about it, is the very least that we can say. The other Middle East players are less, the UAE is, I think, less of a player in all of this, right? They've got their own interests, and Iran is not particularly one of them. They will certainly allow their country to be used to launch attacks, but they're not going to get involved more than that. I wouldn't see. So the rest of the Gulf, and we'll try to sit this one out. I think Egypt, as far removed from this as they are, would be at least slightly more favorable on the Iranian side in all of this, but they're not going to get involved either. I think the big wild card is what's going to happen in Iraq. And not the Iraqi government, because we know they're under the thumb of the United States and the U.S. controls their own oil revenues and everything. But there are enough Iraqi groups at a sub-state level, right, both within the military and outside of it, that will certainly, if it becomes a serious, long conflict, get involved on Iran's behalf. I have no question about that. And the U.S., I think, is very cognizant of that as well. We're going to see the continuing evacuation of U.S. military bases that they believe are the most vulnerable and diplomatic facilities throughout the region over the next week. And I think what is Iraq is going to be, the most important place for those evacuations. We're already seeing, if you noticed last week, the U.S. announced they're withdrawing more troops from Syria because, among other things, they say they're quite happy with al-Qaeda rule there. I believe that. But also those troops could be vulnerable. So as well, because Syria is not, shall we say, completely controlled space, right? So getting them out of the line of fire there, I think, is part of the rationale that is going on as well. So it's not just going to be a long-range strike war of attrition, because while, first of all, the axis of resistance has been mauled over the last few years. I know people, they survived. That kudos, right? The Houthis were attacked, they survived. Hezbollah took them. It took a lot, but they're still alive. Hamas, not technically axis of resistance, however you want to put it, they're not Shia, but there's a degree of cooperation there. Still alive. Not in a good condition. But, and then we can talk Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq and numerous other groups there, popular mobilization units. All of them know, however bad they're hurt, however bad relations between Iran and the members of Axis resistance have gotten with Pezeshkian in power over the last few years. And I do not believe that there's a lot of serious goodwill there from Pezeshkian towards the Axis of resistance, which, from a future historical perspective, I think people will say absolute worst president for Iran to have in this time period. But they will realize, no matter what, that this is likely to be an existential conflict for them as well. If the Iranian government does go down, then they're gone. I mean, they lose, whatever support they had, and they will be also then taken out one by one, whatever they have left. So they will activate if this becomes a long, serious campaign. And they may not have the most offensive capability, but they will all do what they can. And certainly they will keep Israel very busy.
I think more
real conflict. That is fire across the Middle East.
Yeah. Mark, I think that the difference between this time around, if the war happens, would be that Iran is somehow prepared and Russia and China are prepared to inform Iran if the attack is coming. That would be hugely different from what we've seen in June 2025. And that's why I don't think that the United States would have the upper hand the way it had before, or Israel the way it had in 2025, in June. This would make the situation, the whole case of attack on Iran, so much difficult because they can hit, Iran can hit as well. It's not just the United States hitting. And Iran is a vast country. They're not going to be able to control each and every element within Iran.
But
solar's down over here. Efficient ponds up top. Silos down in the back.
Also remember what happened in June. It was only Israel going on the offensive. It was only Israel. The U.S. played a defensive role defending Israel, right? And yeah, at the end there was this sideshow with them dropping some bunker busters, and that may have all been prearranged again with Iran, as a face-saving performance on both sides. But the U.S. will be coming in to kill this time. That is going to be a significant more offensive power, long-range strike damage that is going to be done to Iran straight out of the bat than we saw last time. So, yes, what you said, but also that. So keep that in mind. The first thing that tells us is this going to be a much higher intensity and higher stakes right out of the bat. I mean, it's going to be very hard, very quick. There's going to be no punches pulled. And the whole goal of Iran in the first 48 to 72 hours will be to survive, reconsolidate, and then fight back, right? That similar to what happened last time. From a military strategic perspective, if I was Iran, I would be launching preemptive strikes. I would say this is coming. There's no question about this. We should launch the surprise attack. We should act first. They've certainly provoked us, and the rest of the world clearly sees what's going on here. If they're going to come for us, well, then let's get the jump on them. But I'm not in charge of the Iranian government and military, and
go ahead.
Let's hope the IRGC and Pezeshkian are on the same page right now. That's all I'm saying.
I would say they are.
I hope so.
They are. And when you talk about preemptive attack, you're talking about long before the attack happening, or Iran preempting the attack at the moment that they're feeling the attack is coming?
What now? I mean, it's coming. Why wait until the U.S. has got everything they think they need in place, right? If they've identified vulnerable assets now, if they've got satellite pictures of air defense and everything, and there's no question that it's coming, and from everything I have seen, there's no question that it's coming, then I'm when it comes to war games like that, I'm usually of the belief that the best offense is a good defense. But Iran doesn't have the best defense, right? They're not in that capability. They don't have that air and missile defense that would allow them to play that game against the United States. So in that case, my instinct would be then my stronger card is my offense. Well, then let's hit those air defense facilities now when they're not expecting it. That's what I would say. Let's activate resistance. Let's activate covert groups across the Middle East first. Let's do that now, right? There's even the we're not responsible. There, it's the proxies acting and not us. That is an even better card to play. If I had the ability to activate Kataib Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hezbollah, I would activate them now and make, getting whatever jump I can and making perfectly clear that this is not going to be a drop some bombs and declare victory if you start this. We know you're out for blood, and we're out to survive by whatever it takes. That's what I would do. But
actually, we've heard it from the Iranian commander recently, 1 week ago, that the Iranian strategy has changed from defensive to offensive. I don't know what would be that moment in their mind that they're gonna go on offensive. They're gonna, if they're gonna start all together, not just from inside, but from outside. Because my understanding is that they're gonna attack from all sides, from what they have at the moment, and they're gonna attack.
Unfortunately, that's a decision made at the political level. And again, the Iranian president is not Raisi. The Iranian president is Pezeshkian. Now, of course, what level of decision making the Ayatollah? Certainly, I would believe that he has the ability to overrule the Iranian president in this if he felt it was necessary. But obviously, that's not something he would normally want to do.
But if the war happens, it doesn't matter how the president of Iran is thinking. President of Iran going to be part of those people who are going to decide about what would be the strategy. The president going to be one of them. And the head of the Security Council, many people are going to be in that council deciding about what is the strategy. I think that's why I don't see that much Pezeshkian influence in the decision on the part of the Iranian government and the part of Iran.
Yeah. I absolutely hope you're right. I absolutely hope you're right.
That's what I heard when I was in Iran. Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark.
Hey, we're all on thought,
Coffee. Follow